This is Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily with Andrew Hustler Paterson and Michael Remis.
What's going on, gang? Welcome to another edition of Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Andrew Paterson, Michael Remis with you. Great show coming up. Round 2 of the Stanley Cup Playoffs begins tonight. We'll touch on that a little bit and welcome in Dave Poulin for his thoughts on, a very interesting week around Winnipeg and the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, we'll talk to him first and foremost about that, but also get his thoughts on what we're going to see now we're down to the final 8 of the Stanley Cup tournament. And as we continue kind of hashing out the end of the season and a very interesting weekend from both players, coaches, and general manager, Mike McIntyre of the Winnipeg Free Press is going to jump on as well for his thoughts on what we've heard and where this team and organization goes from here. So should be a good one. Buckle up. Great to have you all with us. If you're finding us on YouTube and you haven't been around before, make sure to hit that red subscribe button and give us a thumbs up while you're at it. We are here live every day, 1 o'clock p.m. Central, for a couple hours, banging around the biggest stories in Winnipeg sports and around the sports world. As I mentioned, Poulin, going to be great to have him on, and Mike coming up. We'll also talk a little bit more. I mean, there was so much to get to yesterday, and we probably didn't even scratch the surface outside of the biggest topics that everyone was talking about around the city and in the chat. Didn't spend a lot of time talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois, but we will get to Dubois and some of his comments as well before we welcome in Dave Poulin. Just before we get Remis in here, shout out to the sponsors that make the show happen. Great to have Winnipeg Gold Eyes and Assiniboia Downs back on board, both opening their seasons of live action a little bit later on in the month, as well as Modern Man Barbershops, Aquatech, Manitoba Battery, Canadian Club, Vita Health, Wallace & Wallace, F Apparel, Nick and Nicky DQ Group, Princess Auto, Consolidated Supply, Royal Sports, Boston Pizza, Little Brown Jug, Aikens Lake, Breezy Bend, and of course our betting partners over at Coolbet Canada. If you missed today's Lock Shop, Dusty and I chopped it up and made picks for the 4 series getting going tonight. Search Lock Shop Bets on YouTube and give us a sub as well over there. Let's get Remis in here and get this show on the road. Remo, what's up?
Just ready for round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs to get underway. We're finally there. I got to pat myself on the back because we have our bracket challenge. I'm tied for first. I nailed every Eastern Conference series to the game. That was pretty awesome for me. Too bad I didn't actually bet any money on it. But hey, I had Jersey in 7, Carolina 6, Toronto in 6, Florida in 7. Also had Dallas in 6. So 5 of 8 hitting to the game. Now that it's done, I can pat myself on the back.
Yeah, well, you have so much swag, you can wear a hood up for the show.
First person on YouTube to do the show with their hood up. It's cold in here. I don't know. I'm cold.
It's an interesting look today. It's an interesting look. This is another reason if you're listening to the podcast, you probably need to tune in sometime on YouTube.
I'm just going to warm up a bit.
What the hell Remis is going to fire up. Yeah, listen, before we get to Jet stuff and Dubois and whatnot quickly, how about that performance by the New Jersey Devils last night? I mean, and I joke with Dusty, I had some good picks in the first round. I had some poor picks. The one series that I got wrong from the get-go and pretty much wrong on a game-by-game basis was that Rangers-Jersey series. And, I mean, I wasn't watching that one as much as some of the others. But I'll tell you what, I'm not going to miss very many New Jersey Devils games going forward. What a performance. What an exciting young team. What a fast team. They skated circles around the Rangers at times last night. But the reason why I rode with the Rangers last night going into Game 7 was experience and goaltending. And I got to tell you, the New Jersey Devils were up for the moment and up for the challenge. And Akira Schmid, who full disclosure, I hadn't even heard of before the playoffs started, outdueled Ilya Shesterkin last night. He was absolutely brilliant. And the Devils now go in on the road and are favorites. We'll do the lines later on, but are favorites against Carolina in the second round of the playoffs. But just an incredible win by an upstart team that I think is ahead of schedule. I think they're playing with house money right now, and I think they are going to be very, very dangerous going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Hughes, this guy, if you didn't know much about him because he's on the Devils, I mean, this guy's a superstar player, and they've made like some pretty good additions. And first of all, Jack Hughes season, 43 goals, 99 points, elite player, and you saw that on the pass to Eric Halla. And Eric Halla, man, this guy's an very underrated player, but he's been on some really good teams. I remember him on Vegas in 2018. Of course, how could you forget that one? He's been on Carolina. He's been on Boston last year, although they kind of disappointed, which led to Bruce Cassidy's firing. But he's kind of an underrated guy. Andre Palat, who they signed. I mean, this is a really nice team, New Jersey, and we kind of laughed when Dougie Hamilton signed there, but I think he was just maybe like a year or two early, and now they're hitting their stride. And this is a year before you thought they would get there. So shout out to New Jersey. And it is kind of funny to think the fans were chanting "Fire Lindy" at the beginning of the season, and here they are in the second round against the Carolina Hurricanes. You said, and they're the favorite over Carolina.
They are favored right now, and I wasn't expecting that. You mentioned the Fire Lindy chants, and I think the Devils started 0-2 or 0-3, and the fans were all over them, and they were doing the Fire Lindy chant, and then 2 months later, they were chanting "Sorry, Lindy." And Lindy Ruff, he's had some playoff experience before and had some great runs. I mean, they're still bitter about Brett Hull's OT winner against the Buffalo Sabres. But yeah, I mean, the Devils, that was an unbelievable comeback after dropping the first two games and not looking very good at home, winning 4 of 5, and speed kills at times. And you mentioned Andre Palat. Man, the play that he made, shorthanded, to essentially take the puck off 2 New York Rangers and set McLeod up for what got them going was that's a guy that knows what it takes to win in the playoffs. That's a guy that's done it in the past, and man, they're getting their money's worth from Andre Palat. I am looking at the chat right now, and everybody is talking about Jacob Trouba. That hit last night. Trouba has had a lot of very, very hard hits, a lot of borderline hits, a lot of dangerous hits. Remis, that was one of the hardest hits I've ever seen. Honestly, I mean, I was watching the game with the pal of mine. I think that might be the hardest hit I've seen since the hardest hit of all time, which, of course, was Dustin Byfuglien on Mark Stone when he played for Ottawa here in Winnipeg. Thankfully, Timo Meier seemed to be okay. They did a little embrace, and he said, "Nice hit at the end." Probably a lot easier to smile after your team won the game. But my God, you don't see hits like that very often, and I know it was borderline. There certainly was head contact. By the letter of the law, a clean or a legal hit. You can decide if it's clean or not, but it was legal. And I'll look forward to asking Dave about this a little later on, about what he thinks of this and whether there will be changes, because while that was technically allowed and Jacob Trouba wasn't penalized, that was a really, really dangerous play, and something that I think is we're more and more concerned about player safety. They might think about getting out of the game, but what a spectacular collision last night. A true hit with violence in it.
You're trying to remember a hit like that one, and every hit you think of, it happened like 20 or more years ago, like Scott Stevens. The way his glove went flying in the air reminded me of Scott Stevens on Shane Willis, when I think it was one of his pieces of equipment like rocketed to the ceiling.
Well, hey, do you ever remember that epic clip of a guy he was a skateboarder, and he was in some massive super pipe that they built on, like, I don't know, like one of those Tony Hawk shows or the circus. And this dude rolls up in the air like 30 or 40 feet and then completely loses control. And he came down and hit, and both of his shoes went flying when that happened. That was how violent that hit was, where things are just flying off, guys. It reminded me of some of the most violent collisions I've ever seen, not even just involving humans.
It was, yeah, I agree. It was pretty absurd, the impact there. I mean, think of it, someone's texting me Darian Hatcher on Peter Sikora, just the image of a New Jersey player on the ice. I mean, you could go on and on. I saw people tweeting Brian Campbell on RJ Umberger in the playoffs was a pretty big one, too. But I mean, there's a guy going through the middle with his head down. The way his head was down almost reminded me of when Anton Strawman hit Brian Little. Now, I think Little was basically all the way bent over and I don't know if he's going through the middle like that. But I agree, you need to take care of yourself when you're going up the middle. But, I mean, you don't want to see people take hits to the head. And I know it is clean according to the rule book, but I don't know, man. You don't want to see guys down on the ice like that. It seems like a bit unnecessary to try to, like, kill a guy in 2023, Huss.
Yeah, well, Trouba was trying to get his team going after that, yelling to his team to wake the F up, and we've seen him do that a couple times before. I still wasn't sure whether he was going to get a call from NHL player safety, and I'm sure they'll go back and look at it, but as I said, by the letter of the law. And listen, I know there's some people saying, they say they want to protect players and then allow that right now. There is an element, and anyone that's played the game knows, what's the first thing they tell you when you're learning to play hockey in a full body contact situation? You got to keep your head up. And Timo Meier didn't, and really leaned into it as well. I'm not really too sure, once Trouba is committed to the hit, how he could have done anything differently. It was spectacular. There's no doubt about that. The good thing is Meier seemed to be okay, and hopefully there's no lasting effects, because he's a guy that didn't do anything in that series, had no points. But if they're going to beat the Carolina Hurricanes in a best of 7, they're going to need a heck of a lot more from him.
Yeah, he was their big trade deadline acquisition. And as we move on to round 2, you and I were talking before the show about the losing team, the Rangers, who had their big trade deadline acquisitions, and they won't be advancing. That's Patrick Kane and Tarasenko. Tampa also going home after trading everything for Tanner Jeannot. So we'll see how New Jersey does. But yeah, everyone talking about that hit, and I think Trouba's had some bad ones. I didn't think that was the worst of what we've seen. I thought his form was actually pretty solid. It just caught a guy who was pretty vulnerable, and maybe the NHL will have to make a decision saying, hey, we know in international hockey you can't do any head contact, and I don't know if the NHL is going to go with that or what, but it's within the rules, and that's what happened with the Joe Pavelski hit from Matt Dumba. They deemed legal as well, so be ready at all times. Like even Nikolai Ehlers, you're back checking. You think nothing's going to happen to you because you're back checking, and there's Ryan Hartman, and all of a sudden you've ran into a brick wall.
Oh, by the way, shout out to my pal Zoltan Wrench Doozer in chat. That skateboarding mishap that I talked about with the shoes flying out, it's Jake Brown. So you look it up on YouTube, skateboarder Jake Brown in free fall. That was what I thought of when we saw the yard sale happen after that hit last night. Of course, we've got games in the National Hockey League tonight, which we'll get to. But we'll also get to the latest on the Winnipeg Jets. Just before we get to the Jets, man, I'm looking forward to Gold Eyes season. Home opener is May 19th, and regular listeners know how much I love going to the ballpark. And I was in Toronto, 2 weeks ago, eating the poutine dog and enjoying the beautiful weather in TO with the roof open, and it just got me ready to go for Gold Eyes season. Of course, Greg Taggart's the new manager. Going to be very interesting to see how the team shapes up. But they're getting going tomorrow with training camp, and then it'll be on the road before they come back to start the season on the 19th of May. The countdown to Craft Beer Corner is on, my friends, and we're definitely going to do a WST outing or two, so we'll let you know when that is. But in the meantime, if you do want to pick up season tickets for the company or groups tickets, or potentially maybe a suite for entertaining, the gang there have amazing customer service. They'd love to help you out. So get on over to goldeyes.com right now and see everything that the Fish have cooking for the 2023 season, their 30th season here as the Boys of Summer in Winnipeg. Cannot wait to get back to the ballpark this season. Sunday, big day for our friends at Modern Man Barbershops. Of course, Modern Man now has 8 locations in Winnipeg, and their newest location on Pembina Highway is hosting a grand opening event on Sunday, May 7th. From noon to 5 p.m., you can receive a haircut for $9 with proceeds to Cancer Care Manitoba Foundation. Plus, the first 100 people get free lunch from the Jeepney food truck. Visit their Instagram at Modern Man Barbershops for more info. And as you can see, I'm a little overdue for a trip to the Scissors. So I'll pop by probably noon, 1 o'clock, see some folks if you're around there, have a bite, and get a cut from our friends over at Modern Man Barbershops. Of course, they got haircuts, beard shaping, shaves, color services, and more. I would get more information on that at Modern Man Barbershops. Hey, with summer right around the corner, make 2023 the year you take the plunge with Aquatech. Visit aqua-tech.ca to design your own custom pool. Their team can provide on-the-spot pricing from designers as well as financing options that suit you. And they'll do more than just put that pool in your backyard. Whole home renovations start with Aquatech. With thousands of renos as their foundation, let Aquatech upgrade any space in your home. Aquatech is ready to make your reno dreams a reality. Learn more about design, pricing, and financing options at aqua-tech.ca. And hey, our friends at Manitoba Battery are continuing to celebrate their 10th birthday as the #1 spot in Winnipeg for batteries. And this time, they're blowing out golf cart batteries for those of you that use your car to enjoy our beautiful Manitoba courses or ripping around from friend to friend at your summer getaway. Right now, 6-volt golf cart batteries are $167. 8-volt golf cart batteries are $177. And those prices include free delivery anywhere within the city limits. And when you return your cores to Manitoba Battery, you'll receive another $17.50 off what's already the lowest price in Manitoba for golf cart batteries. Get them now so you can be ready for May-long weekend and summer fun. The sale goes from now until May 6th. Pop by and see him at 1026 Logan Avenue or go online for more information to manitobabattery.com. And just before we get to the Jets, a big cheers to our friends at Canada's favorite Canadian whiskey, Canadian Club, official spirit of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Bombers back in just like less than a couple weeks. We'll have rookie camp and then the vets coming in. And it won't be long before we're enjoying CC around the Rum Hut and a few cold CC and gingers as well. By the way, CC and ginger now available in 473 milliliter cans at MLCCs and beer vendors around the city. Pick up Canadian Club today at your local Manitoba liquor marts. All right, we do want to get to Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know there's people in the chat, and we should mention this right off the bat. I'm sure Mike will want to talk about it a little bit. Very unfortunate email to Winnipeg Jet fans and season ticket holders yesterday, right about at the end of the show. And Reem, with all the talk about Bones's rant at the end of Game 5, and what we heard from the players, Bones and the general manager, this is one of the more unfortunate mishaps of communications we've seen in a long time. But I know when a lot of people read the email, they were thinking that this was a shot at Bones. Basically, it's the flight log. You know, they have Mitch Clinton writes an article, and I guess probably more of a junior marketing person does a little bit of an update or a little bit of a teaser to get you to go and click on the article and read it. It was a little bit about disappointment at this, after losing a season. The very unfortunate wording for the second paragraph was the Jets had plenty of pushback against Vegas in round 1. I'll be honest, I spit my drink out when I read it. I thought originally it was fake, like probably many people did, because it just seemed completely, shall we say, oblivious to everything that had happened. And unfortunately, I think that was the case. But listen, it's been a real tough 4 or 5 days for the organization, really, ever since the puck dropped in the first period on Thursday night in Vegas for game number 5. The weekend, I don't think went very well from many people's opinions. And anyways, this was, in some ways, it's a little bit of comic relief. I mean, I did reach out and kind of find out what was behind this. And listen, this was a very unfortunate mistake. It was not a shot at Rick Bowness, although I understand how many people would have taken it that way. And I think for everyone in that building, you need to maybe just get back to work, push forward, because there's a lot of work to be done, both in the hockey ops department, on the marketing side of things. And I'm sure whoever was responsible for that's probably having a pretty rough day or two. But it was, honestly, knowing how it went down, Remo, you kind of just have to sit back and laugh. But it was another unfortunate incident for the gang downtown after what had been a pretty trying few days for the hockey club.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of criticism over the press conferences from the weekend from, honestly, just about every local writer, and even Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast talked about Kevin Shovel-Dayoff's press conference from Sunday, and they sent out this email, using the term pushback, calling back to Rick Bowness, and
first line,
and then writing that the only disappointing part of the series where you lost in 5 games was Game 5 where you got eliminated. I mean, maybe losing was the most disappointing part. I don't like losing the series. I don't know, but it just seemed like poor wording. And like, I know Mitch Clinton wrote the article. You were saying he didn't write. Someone else was in charge of writing this email, and maybe they thought, Bones used pushback. I'm going to use the word pushback too. It'll tie it together.
Who knows?
Like, I don't know what they were thinking, but yeah, it looks not great. But I will point out, they used this picture of the press conference. You can see me sitting right there.
Oh, that's right.
That's my back. That's my back.
Let's get to more important things.
Yeah, that's me.
Check out Remis's look on Saturday as we sat down and enjoyed the final addresses from Winnipeg Jet players throughout the day. Yeah, you were looking good that day. I had the WST golf shirt on for Saturday.
Yeah, I went with the it was cold. I thought it was going to be cold in there, but I guess because of all the construction, the heat was turned up. I was wearing a sweater with the WST polo underneath and the collar coming up, poking
great
out.
Look.
What a great look. I
should have been in an F Apparel catalog or something with that.
Yeah, and wore some nice I don't know if they were technically dress pants. I guess they were not jeans. I really didn't know. I did text Ken about the dress code because we don't go to too many of these. And I'm like, Ken, is this okay if I wear like jeans and a polo? He's like, yeah, that's fine. And Ken's there, like suited up. I was like, Ken, you told me it was casual. Come on.
You know what? While we're talking about this and leave this picture up, it's very interesting to see. So Remis is sort of in the back. I'm at the right of Reem on the side. I was sitting beside Edmonds.
Yeah, you're not
Jamie.
in the picture. That's Billick.
I'm not in. Yeah, Billick's there, and then Mike, and then this kind of reminds me of high school. I was always a little bit of a back of the class guy, trying to be away from everything, and we've got quite a line of Keeners here in row 1, I believe, from left to right. Who we had: Ken, Ted, Freezer, Marat.
Yeah.
Who's beside Marat?
Okay, wait. It goes Jeff, Judy Owen, Ted, Marat, Friesen, Ken. Or who's at the end beside Ken?
Okay, sorry. I thought that was
I don't know.
Kelly Moore. I think is right behind the camera
Kelly
on
Moore's,
the left side.
Yeah, you can't see my mouse. And then John Liu is in the middle there, and
Lou
Rennie
looking good
Rennie
as
was
always
right in front of the cameras. Yeah, it was a nice crew there. It was cool to be a part of that.
Yeah, it was. As I say, listen, there's some fallout from this, and we're hearing about it. I mean, you just kind of mentioned the 32 Thoughts, piece with Elliot Friedman talking about the Jet situation, and in a lot of ways, I think it underscores the work that the team needs to do. And listen, Shovel-Dayoff has never been a guy that has been very forthcoming with anything. And I mean, I'm sure that drives the media crazy. Some fans it drives crazy. But I think, as Elliot mentioned, and we've talked about before, I mean, this is an important time for this team. And listen, they need to get over some of the mistakes, some of the self-inflicted stuff that's happened recently, and really get moving forward. And I think for a fan base that I think is really wondering what is to come. I know there's a lot of people that think and that are saying, oh, they're just going to run it back. Listen, I'm here to tell you that is not happening. I don't think it's possible just to run it back. And I think there will be changes, but, acknowledging that at some point, I think would probably go a long ways to, and it's not as much, having that the fans are owed to know exactly, what the general manager is doing. But it's like I said yesterday, it's just a little bit of giving a vision of what is to come, where the team is going. People, you want your fans, you want your customers in any business to sort of believe in what you're doing. And I think that it was a missed opportunity to do that, even in the smallest way on the weekend. And hopefully, I'm not maybe holding my breath on this. Hopefully we will hear a little bit more from the general manager going forward, because as I say, I think that everyone agrees, and we'll ask Dave Poulin about this coming up in a few minutes, Reem. We will ask him, about how he sees this going forward, because, as much as we can talk about a very, very poorly worded email and Game 5 and all of that, I think what was very clear from the coach, from the players, and really what we've seen over years, but especially in the second half of the season, which was cited by Bones, is that there are some changes that need to be made. I can't imagine that some won't. It might not be as much as everyone likes. But to acknowledge that and give people a level of excitement about what to come, I think is important. And that, I think, was the missed opportunity that we didn't get on Sunday from the GM.
Yeah, when you talk about the Jets, it just seems like we're in Groundhog Day here. We've seen a lot of the same thing. You've seen a couple seasons with hot starts and poor second halves. You've seen no-shows in elimination games, or pushback. We want to keep using that term. And you would have liked to hear saying, hey, we know that we've disappointed and we're trying to improve and come back stronger next season. Obviously, they're in a really tough spot with the contracts, but seemed like they're pretty fine with getting 8th place in the playoffs, and how the season where they kind of glossed over the playing like one of the worst teams in the league in January, February. So, I'm not sure what they, thankfully I don't have to make these hard decisions that they're going to have to make, but we're all interested to see at what the expectations are going to be going forward. And one thing that kind of saves them, Huss, is that their division is not great. How many teams are trying to rebuild? Arizona, Chicago, St. Louis took a step back, Nashville as well. So I think the Jets definitely are in position to get back into the playoffs, but in terms of among the league, are they going to be able to compete with those top teams? I'm not so sure.
Well, and you know what? This is a good question from Rob Mahoney, and I've said this to a number of people. Andrew, what is your definition of running it back? Because they're not rebuilding, making the playoffs is their goal. And listen, making the playoffs should be their goal. I think this team has too much talent right now on it, regardless of what you feel about any particular player or the way that they played together. There's too much talent on this to be one of these teams that's sniffing around in the draft lottery for the top pick. But when again, however you want to call it, there's many people have different definitions of rebuilding, retooling. Here's what I expect. I expect probably 2, if not 3, of the players we talked the most about this weekend: Connor Hellebuyck, Mark Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Blake Wheeler, to not be with the club next year. And listen, I think everyone knows my opinion on Hellebuyck. There's nothing I'd love more than to see him long-term here and be the franchise player. But I didn't get a lot of optimism from what we heard from him on the weekend that might be in the cards, unless the Jets can do a hell of a lot better sales pitch at Hellebuyck on the future and the vision than the team did to all of us on the weekend. And then obviously the Dubois situation, we're going to talk about that in a minute and hear from him. I think is quite clear that there's not a lot of optimism on keeping him around. He's too valuable an asset to leave for nothing. And then Scheifele and Wheeler. And, many people thought that maybe that was a change that needed to be made in the past. I'm one of them. I think it's eminently clear that needs to happen, at least for one, if not both right now. But these are all significant assets, folks. And as I said, the best thing, and I thought a lot about this watching Jersey last night, about how many talented young players they have and how they put that group together. I don't think that this rebuild, retool, however we want to call it, necessarily means that, if you lose those players, you're done. There'll be things coming back. And the biggest challenge, and I'm sure many of you agree with where Winnipeg is and the way this team needs to operate compared to a number of other teams. I mean, the ideal thing to get back for some of those players would be some younger players, potentially players on ELCs, players that might not be as refined and developed, certainly as the stars that might be leaving, but come with a lot of promise and will come and get an opportunity to be a part of what's going forward. I mean, realistically, in another year is I think when we'll probably see the likes of Brad Lambert get a shot and Rutger McGroarty. But in the middle, I think, younger players that might not be as established in the National Hockey League, but do have potential. That's kind of what we're looking for. And I think what they're looking for is, and I think if you change the mix of personalities in that room and, a little bit more bite to this lineup that, I think has been missing for a while since certain individuals left the team, I think there's a chance that this team can be competitive. Are they going to be going for a Stanley Cup, especially if Connor Hellebuck's not there? Probably not. But you make a great point, Reem, about the division right now and where we're at as a, where the team is at, knowing that, you still do have Kyle Connor, and you still do have Nikolai Ehlers and Josh Morrissey, of course, coming off that brilliant season, has 5 more years on the deal. So the team is just too good, and I think does have too much talent, even if you move on from some of those players that we've talked about, to be a real bottom feeder right now. And listen, if they missed the playoffs and it was a building year and you had a lot of young players to be excited about, I could certainly live with that. I guess people have different opinions on exactly how that would affect the fan base right now, but I certainly get the indication from a lot of people that they're more than willing to do that. We'll see whether they're more than willing to support the team while the case is. I am, but I'm not sure if all the people that are pulling for that rebuild are going to be there 20 or 30 nights a year next year. But it all comes down to maximizing the asset value of the players that you're frankly going to be forced to deal. Empower the other ones that are still here, continue to move in a forward direction with the style of system and commitment to playing hard each and every night. And that's maybe some of the identity too that I frankly think might be able to improve if some of those players are changed. So it's just the tip of the iceberg here, Remo, for the next couple months heading into the draft and then another couple months through the summer before September and training camp.
Yeah, I do want to give a shout out to everyone who's been with us here the last month, because we had the most podcast downloads in a month ever in April, and it's kind of what it was like for us last summer, where last summer we had some of our best month, which is kind of funny because they don't play any games in the summer, and I'm anticipating a lot of intrigue and following the rumors here as we go towards the draft. And there's probably going to be, I would agree that you think of the names Hellebuck, Scheifele, Dubois, Wheeler, at least 2 of them get traded, and we'll see a bit of a different roster next year, because we've seen the same one the last couple of years, and but going into the teetering between making the playoffs and not is what the standard has been for them, aside from that 2018.
And we're seeing it right now with the Kraken getting in. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, oh, great, you made the playoffs. But, I mean, that's where everything starts. And once you make the playoffs, even if you're a great team, there's no guarantees. Ask the people in Boston and ask the people in Colorado. So do you want your team to compete for the playoffs? Absolutely. But to me, the success of this next 12 months will not necessarily be on making the playoffs. It'll be on how this team looks with the necessary changes, what is able to come back, other moves that are made, and how different this team will look. But, sort of changing over that core, empowering some new players, and most importantly, developing an identity that, win or lose, you don't have performances of such an important magnitude like we saw in Game 5 against Vegas, like we saw in Game 4 against Montreal, and like we saw against in Game number 6 against the St. Louis Blues. Tell you what, we will talk about PLD, certainly with Mike McIntyre. We do have some clips. We'll hang those because Dave Poulin is ready to go. And we're going to bring Dave on to get his thoughts on everything that's happened around this hockey team, as well as the upcoming round 2. Just before we bring in Dave, Vita Health, Our great friends have 7 locations in town at Vita Health Fresh Market stores with great prices on natural and organic supplements, beauty products, and groceries, and Winnipeg's largest assortment of local products too. If you've had your healthy fats today, omega-3 fatty acids are beneficial for your skin, brain, joint, and heart health. And Health First Omega Supreme has all of that. You can get your healthy fats the easy day with this 1-a-day soft gel. Health First Omega Supreme's on sale all month at Vita Health Fresh Market, empowering people to lead healthy lives. 7 Winnipeg locations, including the newest store in Linden Ridge, and online at myvita.ca. And of course, Wallace & Wallace, back at it right now as Winnipeg's fencing and overhead door specialist, but also a great supporter of ours and the Unsung Hero program we did throughout the winter along with Josh Morrissey. And I'm not exactly sure when it's going to happen, but very soon Josh is going to come on, talk a little bit about the season. We'll also connect with the folks at the Dream Factory who were the beneficiaries of the donations from Wallace & Wallace, which were matched by Josh and Margot Morrissey. So I'm really looking forward to that. And a kind of a final thank you and congratulations to all the unsung heroes, and thanks to everyone that nominated people throughout the year. In the meantime, if you got fencing or garage door needs, go to the experts at Wallace & Wallace, 452-2700. To arrange a time to come and give you a free estimate. You can also visit them online at Wallace Fences or pop down to their showroom on Lawson Road off of Kenniston. How's the closet looking, fellas, as we get into spring and summer? If you need to up your menswear game, you need to head down to F Apparel. With spring and summer here, your custom suits beginning at $400, but so much more than suits. Chinos, golf pants, custom shirts, both tucked and untucked styles, an incredible selection of menswear accessories. If you're in a wedding party, make sure to talk to them about a 15% discount for the wedding party when you get your suits at F. And for high school grads coming up in June, get the young man a new suit. And that'll come with a free custom shirt and tie valued at about $150. 190 Smith Street's where you'll find them. You can make an appointment online at that's EPHapparel.com. And hey, the sun is shining right now. Golf courses are open. Great time to head down to Nick and Nicky DQ for a delicious blizzard, maybe a burger or two. But all the new summer blizzard flavors are in right now, and the great staff at Nick and Nicky DQ waiting for you right now. Pop down and see them. DQ Northgate, DQ Polo Park, DQ St. Anne's, or the very popular DQ south of the city out in Niverville, Manitoba. All right, Mike McIntyre coming up after 2 p.m. Right now, though, let's welcome in TSN hockey analyst Dave Poulin to Winnipeg Sports Talk.
Lots to get to right now. Poulin, how are you?
I don't know. That's how I answered during the pandemic. Man, what a weekend. What a 5-6 days of hockey, guys. It's been incredible. It really has. From top to bottom. And, you know, and somebody asked me this morning if it's the year of the upset, and this may surprise you. 6 of the 8 teams remaining were in the top 8 in the league. But the fact that Boston got upset and the Cup champions are out makes everybody thinks the whole thing is upside down. But 6 of the top 8 teams in the league are still playing hockey. So there's been a lot to digest, a lot in the respective markets. And guys, maybe none more so than in your market.
Well, I mean, honestly, and maybe this is good for the Jets because it's been, I think, by any standard, a very rough few days for the organization on the ice, off the ice. You know, if the Leafs weren't moving on and the Oilers weren't there and the Bruins didn't lose the way they had, probably would have been getting a lot more ink maybe outside of this market because, man, there's been a lot to talk about around this Winnipeg Jets team since Game 5, Pooley.
There was, and there was a lot all year because we essentially saw 2 different teams in 3 different parts. The team that started the year and played 55 games or whatever and was in first place in the Central and was a tremendous story. And then it went sideways and couldn't get it back on track. And then late got it back on track in such a positive manner that there was a lot of positive energy heading into the playoffs. And even through, you know, obviously the start of the playoffs and even through the comeback game in which you win that game in overtime, we might be having a different conversation right now. And then it went really sideways at the end. And it really, in some ways, flashed back even beyond this year at the end to what had plagued the team through some of the portions of last season?
Well, I mean, listen, we don't need to spend too much time talking about Game 5 because, frankly, there's not much to say. It was an effort that drove the coach nuts, quite obviously. And what I think for people that have followed this team for such a long time is that it was deja vu of, Game 6 against St. Louis in 2019 and Game 4 against Montreal, where the teams with their backs against the wall, just absolutely no response. And, to use our Bonesism, no pushback. Well, what was your first reaction when you heard Bones erupt the way he did after Game 5?
My first reaction is there's a reason there's a waiting period before coaches speak after games, and it wasn't long enough. I have part of my role with the Leafs with both Randy Carlyle and Ron Wilson was meeting them right post game, and essentially we had a little bit more of a window, and particularly at home when the visiting team would go first, to really try and get things calmed down. It's hard to fathom for someone that hasn't witnessed it, but to sit across the desk from those two gentlemen for the better part of 5 years, to be a coach myself for 10 years, albeit at a very different level, it still involved the same human emotions that a coach has. And there's a reason that Rick Bowness has been successful for as long as he has, and it's because he takes things personally. He lives the game of hockey. He doesn't just coach the game of hockey. And it couldn't have been more evident because it's personal when you have messaged a group for the period of time that he has, in the manner that he has, and seen so much success, even in the last year, percentage-wise of the number of games, and yet have something like that happen at the most crucial time. So that's where the emotion comes from, guys. It's personal. It's hard to understand if you've never stood in the shoes or sat in the seat, but he's the ultimate top end of it. And it's not the assistant coaches. It's not, the video guys. It's not the supporting crew. It's Rick Bowness. He's the head coach. It says so right on the game sheet. And he wears it, and that's why he's good. And that's why you get an emotion like you got after Game 5.
Well, and to be honest, Dave, we've seen it in the Winnipeg Sports Talk chat and everyone that's commenting on the shows. It was well received by the fans because, frankly, it was very similar to what was happening at bar tops and living rooms around Winnipeg after seeing that game. And, even preceding Rick being here, what we've seen before, in elimination games from this hockey club. But what was very interesting about it was that he referenced, what had happened in January and February. It was quite clear that this was an eruption that was sort of building. And I'm interested in your perspective on what that says about, where this team is right now heading into the offseason and next year, because I think it's quite clear to anyone paying attention that certainly the head coach feels that there's probably some changes that need to be made or a different way of doing things for a group that's been together, at least this core, for a pretty significant period of time.
Essentially what you've done, you've accelerated the summer. That's what you've done. A lot of teams have a hard time identifying what their issues were. And it appears that the issues have been identified. They're inside that room. So now the brain trust gets together and the management group and the coaching group and go through in detail exactly what was said but not stated, if that's the correct way to put it. You don't now, guys, if this had happened over the next week or two, I was just surprised by the timing with Rick. That's what I was surprised by. Not that this is going to happen, but that the timing of it right after the game, it was bubbling so hard that he couldn't carry it into the next few days.
Poulin, we were down at the rink on Saturday hearing from the players in the annual Garbage Day, media addresses before they hit the road.
Garbage bag, I believe, not Garbage Day.
Yeah. Good point. Garbage bag day.
We're leaving with the bags.
Locker clean out. And, we heard it right off the bat from Blake Wheeler, who said that he was disappointed. I believe the quote was with the way Rick conducted himself. We heard a number of other players that expressed frustration with the fact that that was aired out there. The one thing that we really didn't hear from anybody, which I think probably would have gone a long way, was that, hey, listen, we understand that Rick's an emotional guy. We didn't like what we heard of it, but owning a little bit of Game 5, which wasn't there. What do you take away from that? I mean, does that tell us something about the mental makeup of the Winnipeg Jets Hockey Club, but the way the players reacted to it without anyone really standing up and saying, listen, we didn't like it, but I can kind of understand it considering what had happened in game number 5?
Well, it's embarrassing for them, Andrew. That's what it is. And they know. When I'm sitting in the locker room, I know. And there were times, in thinking of my leadership role in Philadelphia and in Boston, there were times where when you have a players-only meeting, everyone knows what to say because they've heard it in other meetings. And there were times when I would say, I'd meet with the leadership team and I'd say, we're in a players-only meeting, but guess what? I don't want to hear what you have to say because I don't believe it. And you can say that in a closed-door room. And I don't want to hear you stand up and go through the rhetoric of, we have to work harder, we have to do this, we have to do that. It's deeper than that. And that's the personal side of it for the players. That's why, arguably, you didn't hear that, is because it's embarrassing to them. And they are being called out in a very public fashion. And there's a responsibility to playing the game at a high level, to being one of the leaders is just that. You have to be one of the leaders. And you have to take charge of that room. And it doesn't sound like that happened in a proper fashion. It may have, and there may have been a split at the top in the room. And I think that will come out. But what is assured is that you're not running the same team back out there next September. I mean, there's assured. And guess what? You're going to have some trade partners out there because there's other teams that have been through the same thing, maybe not quite as publicly, but have had the same disappointments. And there may be teams, I mean, right off the top of your head, there may be a team in New York right now this morning that does have the same issues. We don't know that. It hasn't come out. But when you see a team disappoint that's capable, you know there are other underlying factors. That's where this is. And there are underlying factors with individuals because that's what a hockey team is. You can't say it's something, I don't even know what. Well, the travel wasn't great or the food wasn't great. It's not those things. It's the play of the players. That's what it ultimately comes down to, is the play of the players. And when you don't perform at the level that you're capable of and that you are demanding yourself, it's embarrassing, Andrew.
Bones, after the players spoke, and I don't even want to say he walked it back. I mean, I think he tried to turn the temperature down a little bit by saying, maybe his choice of words disgusted, maybe was a little bit over the top. But he was very clear that he stands behind the message of what he said. And then bringing all of that to Sunday when we heard from Kevin Cheveldayoff, and Chevy spoke for a long time. I mean, as he is often to do, kind of danced around a lot of the meat of what had been asked of him. But I mean, as someone that's been an executive before, Dave, talk to me about Cheveldayoff's position right now. And, the fact that I think most people know and assume that there will be some significant moves, keeping in mind the challenges of being the GM in Winnipeg. I mean, trades aren't as easy to be made here as other spots. We get that. But while he didn't say it on Sunday, what do you think is going on inside that GM's office in the management meetings when they are pushing ahead for what will undoubtedly be, or should at least be, a crucial couple of months leading into the draft for a team that, even if they don't want to move on, some guys are frankly going to be forced to do that, it looks like, if they can't get extensions done?
Well, as I mentioned, a lot of their work has been done for them by Rick in that presser. As tough as the timing was and everything else, I mean, they clearly have identified some of the issues. Now you've got to address them. That's the challenge. You've got to address them. And it does seem overwhelming because, you're likely talking some significant players here, but there are very good players traded in the National Hockey League every year, and for a variety of reasons. Some of it is just defined term. Some of it is simply that they've been there a long time and it's flat out time for change. And you think by changing some of the pieces around that's going to change the environment of the locker room, and sometimes it doesn't. the mix of what the group is incredibly important. The mix right now doesn't appear to be correct. And that's defined by their play. That's defined by what the coach's read is on them. And that's defined by the result because it wasn't good enough.
Dave Poulin, TSN hockey analyst with us here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Obviously, this is going to dominate our program for the next little while, but there are still 8 teams. I got to ask you about Sunday. The Florida Panthers coming off the mat. I mean, really a second away from losing in 5 games when Brad Marchand had that breakaway inexplicably off that play that, huge save by Bob. How'd the Panthers do it, and what happened to this Colorado Avalanche?
Well, think of the narrative right there in Florida had Marchand scored on that breakaway. It would have been an ultra disappointing year for a team that had disappointed the entire season, essentially. And we can't lose sight of the fact that they were the President's Cup winner last year. And, so you had the 2 best teams in consecutive years during the regular season playing in the first round of the playoffs. You say, well, how did Florida get here? Well, they disappointed and underachieved all year. That's how they got there. And then they get saved by the bell, and then Allmark turns it over in overtime and gifts them the win in Game 5. And here we go. And then now you're starting to question a team that in Boston that was put together, I thought, so well by Donnie Sweeney, but he also got a lot of things going his way. And when I say that, you went from good coach to good coach. You made that proper decision that Bruce Cassidy had run his course. He goes somewhere else and succeeds. You bring in Jim Montgomery, who seemingly made every right decision, Andrew. And then all of a sudden, at the most crucial time, maybe Allmark was so good because he did rotate on a regular basis through the regular season. And Swayman did play every second or third game. When they stopped doing that, it wasn't the same Allmark. Levis Allmark was a different goalie. Okay, so there's step 1. And, you made lineup decisions, line decisions. Everything is questioned now about a coach that will likely win Coach of the Year after a perfect year. It's a crazy business. It really is. For Florida, okay, should we be surprised that Bobrovsky shone in games 5, 6, and 7? He won 2 Vezinas, albeit 5 or 6 years apart. So the capabilities are there. Like, think of that craziness. That guy won 2 Vezinas. So every 5th year he turns it on. Like, how do you figure that out?
It wasn't even their goalie heading into the playoffs. It was
no. And they wouldn't have been in the playoffs had they used him down the stretch. Like, think about that. And so you've got him. Who knows how to evaluate that going into the second round. Brandon Montour looked like Erik Karlsson in 2017. He was up ice every shift. He was all over the place. Matthew Tkachuk, arguably right now, is the best player in the playoffs. He literally carried that team. He aggravated, he annoyed, he played, he scored, he assisted. If you look closely down the stretch, almost every big goal down the stretch at a key time was scored or assisted by Matthew Tkachuk. Like, not just that he was on the ice or they did the shift before. He was in on them. And, so Florida, I don't even know what to think about. I just don't. And now go to Colorado. If you were going to pick the entire across the league, because let's face it, Florida was red hot coming down the stretch and, but they were playing Boston. But if you were going to pick the favorable matchup in the first round, it was Seattle, the newbies. It was the defending Cup champs. And, that's the matchup you would have picked and said, okay, well, if you were picking 8 series and you said, okay, pick them in order of which ones you're most confident in, you likely would have picked Colorado, Seattle first. Maybe. I think you would have.
Oh, I mean, certainly if you looked at the betting odds going into it, I mean, they were the biggest favorite.
Yeah. But you play the games, and it seems like every handful of years, Andrew, there is a year like this. And the first one in my career was 86. We were heavy favorites. We got beaten by the Rangers in the first round. I don't know, we're 35 or 40 points ahead of them. Edmonton lost in the second round to Calgary. All of a sudden, now there's this path, and the upstart Montreal Canadiens sneak out of nowhere and win the Stanley Cup in 1986. Maybe this is one of those years, But as I said, I think teams 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8 in the league standings are still playing hockey. So this isn't a total upstart, series moving forward.
I know there's going to be a lot of talk about this Leafs-Panthers series, but while I've got you, I'd love to hear what you think we're going to see from the Edmonton Oilers going up against the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, it was the tale of two series, and I think this is part of the reason why Bones was so nuclear afterwards. I mean, we saw what the Winnipeg Jets were capable of in that first game, and they looked even better in the first period of game number 2. But again, they got sort of punched in the mouth by Vegas, and as the series went on, they weren't able to match that. Vegas is a very well-built, deep team. They don't have the star power of the Edmonton Oilers, but they're going to be a very, very tough out. I mean, what do you make of the challenge that is going to be there for Connor McDavid, Draisaitl, and the Oilers?
The two biggest unknowns for me were in net with Laurent Brossoit, because we just didn't know what the playoff version looked like. And, they're talking a lot about his health and the hip surgery that he had, the confidence that he has, and he appears to be right on top of his game. That was a huge question. So was Jack Eichel for me. We'd never seen Jack Eichel play a playoff game. How do we know how he was going to perform in the playoffs? And he was good. Mark Stone, no one knew about health-wise. We knew the player, and we knew how good the player was. And, I'd seen that firsthand in Ottawa, and I'd seen it firsthand in Vegas. Well, that he's playing at the top of his game. It's a well-built defense. It's a big physical defense. They're smart. They play hard. Not a lot of people know Nicholas Hague or guys like that. They're good. They're really good players. So I think Edmonton has their hands full. They also have a high level of confidence. They beat a very good LA team who matched up with them pretty well because of Kopitar and Danault. And they showed more depth than they've shown. The question they had, like Vegas did, was in net, and Stuart Skinner was tremendous. Jack Campbell came in and did what he had to do when he did it. And, and another team that ended up using 2 goalies to get through. And so I think the star power wins out here. I really do. And it's funny because when you say star power, you think, well, we must be talking about Vegas. But I do think the star power of 97 and 29, the ability to use them together or apart, but the depth that surrounds them. Because quite frankly, Zach Hyman had a pretty quiet, till the big goal, a pretty quiet series. And Nugent Hopkins, not as loud as he'd been with 100+ points this year. But there's more depth there. Matthias Ekholm was as advertised for me. He's an exceptional player. And the big question about Tyson Barrie, the losing of Tyson Barrie in that deal and how the power play would pan out, Evan Bouchard has taken a step in that direction. So I do think it's Edmonton that goes through, and a team, I don't want to jump ahead of you here, but to me, still a force out of the 8 teams remaining. If you were going to say, who should you keep a close eye on, it's the Dallas Stars. And to me, they've got maybe the only one true number 1 goaltender that's left. Everybody else, the article I wrote maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, Andrew, about rather than have a number 1 guy that you draft and develop and play, you're better off going and getting one when you need one. Because it seems like all the number 1s, the true number 1s, are out of the game right now, other than Jake Ottinger, who's truly a drafted and developed number 1 goalie. And so that could be the difference. And the mix for me with these teams, it's always the mix of players. You get Pavelski back, which I don't know if he is, but you get him back. Their mix of old and young is as good as any group, without a question.
And you know what? Just I did want to quickly hit Game 7 last night before we go, Poulin. And speaking of goaltending, I mean, there was this Akira Schmid who I was looking at his numbers last night. For the games that he played in the NHL were quite good. I mean, in the A, he was a .905 save percentage. I mean, nothing special. And there he is out-dueling, a Vezina Trophy winner in Shesterkin on the other side. I was so impressed with New Jersey last night and really coming off the mat after losing the first 2 games at home. Just your thoughts on Jersey, how frisky of an opponent they will be for Carolina. And while we're at it, got to get your thoughts on the Trouba hit last night as well.
Okay, so start with the Rangers push all in, right? So it's only 5 years ago that Jeff Gorton wrote that letter that said we're in a full rebuild mode. Yeah. And through a variety of circumstances that we've discussed on this show, Adam Fox decides he wants to be a Ranger, is able to navigate it through a weird series of events. Artemi Panarin decides he wants a New York address, he gets one. And, then they win the lottery and move up in the lottery a couple of times, and you get a couple of players that, quite frankly, didn't impact the series, Lafreniere and Kakko. But they're a good team, and they have one of the best goalies in the game. Then they push all in. Push all in. Tarasenko, push all in. Patrick Kane. And they don't get it done. And Jersey looked faster. They looked more aggressive. They looked hungrier. Jack Hughes was tremendous. Andre Palat did his Ryan O'Reilly type of thing where...
Oh, what a game he had last night.
Tremendous. But that's the Ryan O'Reilly trade for Toronto, right? Pedigree, been there, done that, unflappable. And Palat on those, and you had guys on those Tampa teams like Killorn who always seemed to rise, but Palat was right there with them. And so that's a nicely built team. And they're built long-term. They restructured some of their defense. I believe 4 of those defensemen were traded for or are free agents. I think Severson would be the only draft and develop guy in their group. Ball was in the big kid, Kevin Ball was in the Taylor Hall deal. Marino was traded for this summer. Hamilton would have been a free agent. So you went out and rebuilt that team in a very nice manner. So Akira Schmid, we're doing a game in Jersey, and I'm doing it with Brian Mudryk, and they're playing Montreal. Start of third period, a couple of minutes in, I look down and I mouth to Muddy. It's a new goalie in there. No announcement, no press box announcement. I swear, no on-ice announcement. They just kind of slipped him in there. I was like, you can't just do that. You got to give us a note or something. And it was almost like the same way you came into the playoffs. Yeah, not much fanfare or anything, we're just going to slide this guy in here. So I laughed because I sent Money a note. He's over in Switzerland. He was doing the U18s. I said, the same way you came into the league. They just slipped him in there. Didn't tell anybody he was coming in. But what a force. The Trouba hit, Andrew, by the letter of the law, it's legal. I think that will be something they review. In international hockey, that would have been penalty. It likely would have been a major penalty because any contact they had, even the sort of subjective went through the body first. Man, what a collision. Oh, now, anytime I see a hit like that, yes, it's on the hitter. It's also on the hitty. And that's a pretty veteran player in Timo Meier. That is the way too many guys in the NHL are skating with their head down, unaware of where people are on the ice. Now, a little different case last night. The Trouba came off the bench. Kind of a little bit of a sneak attack in the way he came, but still head down the whole time. But the violence of that, if you'd have said 2 minutes for violence, I'm not sure you would have got an argument. They just made up a penalty called violence. That was Scott Stevens revisited on several occasions. And it's a hit you don't see in the league anymore. And I think you have to take it out. You can't skate with your head down through the midsection of the ice. There's some responsibility on the hitty.
Well, and listen, I mean, we've all seen it a number of times. And I mean, you can certainly make an argument that the principal point of contact was the head. But to your point, Dave, I mean, Meier was almost leaning forward into him and didn't prepare it. And I mean, I'm sort of split on this. I mean, you either get to a point where it is incumbent on the hitter to not make contact with the head. If that's the rule, then, then obviously you probably avoid a little bit more of that. But
well, you can't go low there, though. You can't go low.
That's the thing. I mean, essentially, then you're taking out that hit period and not able to challenge guys. And at that point, there's probably a hell of a lot more guys skating over the blue line with their head down.
So now can I fly to the middle of the ice? There was a hit early in the year. Might have been Trouba again on Athanasiou. And Athanasiou was all upside down about it. He hadn't looked up in 5 seconds. Like he hadn't even sure he knew which ice surface he was on. Like you can't skate around with your looking down at your skates to see if your laces are tied. And, it's through the middle of the ice. But man, was it a hard hit, Andrew.
But it was the hardest hit I've seen since Buff on Mark Stone. which to me is the hardest hit I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I was going through my catalog as well, and we saw a lot of them over the years playing in that old Patrick division. But boy, oh boy, that was a hard one last night. I do think it's revisited in some manner philosophically, and I would love to be in the room when that conversation was going on.
Oh, Poulin, this has been awesome. Thanks so much. We're going to get going with round 2 tonight. 2 more games tomorrow. Fun time to be a hockey fan, and as we discussed, a lot of intrigue as to what happens with the home team here in Winnipeg over the next few months. Thanks so much, and enjoy the games.
Always a pleasure, Andrew. Tell your folks to hang in there.
All right, man. As always, great stuff with Dave Poulin, TSN hockey analyst. Mike McIntyre's up. We're going to get back to the Jets season aftermath in just a minute. But as we mentioned off the top of the program, Goldeyes are back this month, Bomber training camp, and we've got a CFL draft tonight. We'll definitely dive in with first of many Bomber reports tomorrow for our friends at Princess Auto, great sponsors of the Bombers and the Winnipeg Goldeyes. Of course, Princess Auto is where you'll find the best deals on the most unique assortment of tools and equipment around. Everything you need to complete the projects on your list or start something new is at Princess Auto. 2 Winnipeg locations, Panet Road, Portage Avenue West, and you can always shop online 24/7, 365 at princessauto.com. Well, I'm seeing some movement outside. A little bit of green grass coming. We'll have some leaves coming up soon. Springtime is here, and it's time to get on it. If you have irrigation needs or artificial turf needs, Consolidated Supply is the place for you. Our pal Joe's been serving the golf industry for a long time, but they can also take care of your landscaping and property as well with irrigation systems, artificial turf, and heck, if you need a golf cart, they're the club car dealer in Manitoba, have some great, beautiful new ones, used ones as well, and other great options for your property, including hot tubs and amazing outdoor kitchen options as well as small engine parts and repair. Pop by and see Consolidated Supply at their new showroom, open to the public, 1395 Niagara Road East. You can find out more online at cte.ca. Well, Jets season is unfortunately over, but many of you might be jumping on another bandwagon. Not that I support that, but whatever team you support in the National Hockey League, more than just the Winnipeg Jets, Royal Sports has it all for you. Tons of Blue Jays gear as we get into baseball season, and of course, Bomber gear as well with the season just around the corner. Whatever your merch needs are, Royal Sports has it for you. But it's much more than just fan gear right now, because with spring here, stock is arriving daily as your soccer superstore, baseball headquarters, softball spot, and place for all your tennis equipment, not to mention a huge selection of bikes. 750 Pembina Highways where you need to go. Royal Sports, Winnipeg's finest for over 40 years. Follow them on Instagram as well at Royal Sports Pembina for the latest merchandise drops and sale information. As we just talked with Poulin, round 2 is on tonight. We've got the Leafs and the Panthers, the Stars and the Kraken. And, well, it was the Whiteout headquarters. Boston Pizza's still your fan headquarters for second-round NHL playoff action. Pop by with the new menu built on Fanalytics, including that great triple play combo, including cheesy bear bread, cactus cuts, and the Thai chicken bites. And, hey, if you're staying in, you can always order online at bostonpizza.com. All right, let's welcome in Mike McIntyre from the Winnipeg Free Press. Mike, great to see you on the weekend. And, oh, what a weekend it was, coming out of a end of the season that was a thud and then a bit of a nuke from the head coach.
Yeah, I mean, we said this was probably going to be the most interesting offseason in 2.0 history, and my goodness, it is off to a flying start, and nothing's really happened. There's been no signings, no trades, but no shortage of juicy morsels for us to sink our teeth into, many of them of the self-inflicted variety. And, you know, the Jets they're not just making headlines locally here, Haas. They're making headlines around the hockey world, and really for all the wrong reasons. It has not been a banner few days. I wrote, I think in Sunday's column, that you could say the stretch from Thursday through to Sunday was maybe the most embarrassing period in 2.0 history. And just when we thought it was over, another log or 10 were put on the fire yesterday with a truly bizarre message to the fans sent out by the organization that reeked of sticking a shiv in the back of their head coach, given the very interesting wordage that was included. And, it just creates this whole feeling of dysfunction right now surrounding the organization.
Yeah, we talked about that a little earlier. I mean, I think literally comedic, if you can kind of step away and you're not involved in it. Very unfortunate mistakes, plenty of oversight there that did add a little bit of gas onto the fire. But what is important, of course, is not what we're hearing from some young person that's trying to promo Mitch Clinton's season wrap-up. It's what we heard from the guys that are really the difference makers in the organization. And, I mean, let's start where it all started, coming at the official end of the season. A Game 5 performance. I don't know how much we need to talk about that. There really isn't much to talk about. I mean, there was no pushback, as we heard from the coach afterwards. I mean, a game that reminded many of us of Game 6 against the Blues in 2019 and the final game in the 4-game sweep against the Montreal Canadiens. But, Mike, you've been around this team since 2011. You follow the National Hockey League very closely. What was your first reaction when you heard Rick Bowness's post-game speech for the first time? And now that we're a few days removed and heard from players and whatnot, what do you make of it, and what will the lasting effects of that be?
Well, I loved what Rick Bowness said, because I think he was speaking not just for himself. He was speaking for a very frustrated fan base. Rick Bowness is no dummy. He's been around the league for 4 decades. He's seen a lot of things. In fact, there's probably not much that Rick Bowness hasn't seen. And at various points in this season, Huss, I think he was seeing things from this Jets group, particularly members of the core, that he's probably never had to deal with in his 4+ decades in the league. The sense of entitlement, the lack of coachability of some of these players. And so I think Rick Bowness, it was clear this was building up, and yeah, he let loose with both barrels on Thursday night in Vegas. And so all the attention, of course, then turned to, well, what are the players going to have to say about this? And there was an opportunity to show some of the accountability that has been so lacking around here for so long. When they met with the media on Saturday, and instead we got the opposite. There was anger, but not at their performance or their lack of accomplishments. And there was pushback, but not against the Vegas Golden Knights on the ice. It was against Rick Bowness. And, to put it bluntly, the players seemed upset that their coach was a big meanie pants to them in public. And the idea that he had somehow broken some unwritten rule by taking it public, these players saying, we wish you would have come to us with this behind closed doors. Were these players not listening? Did they think their coach was happy with the way they were playing? And again, Rick Bowness, this was not the first time he'd sounded the alarm. It was the culmination of many, many times over the course of the season, especially in the second half. So this whole playing innocent, or wow, we were really submarined by these public comments, it just rings so hollow. And unfortunately, it serves up in a very public way, maybe the most public way we've ever seen, the root causes of so much of the issues with this team, that they're very fragile, and clearly they don't respond very well to being challenged in any way, shape, or form. And, I think it was just a dismal performance on the ice in Game 5, and it was an even worse performance off the ice from the players. And, unfortunately, Rick Bowness, he kind of walked it back a little bit, although I give him credit. He didn't walk back.
Not really.
No.
I didn't take it that way as much as that's what it was designed to do.
Yeah, I mean, he said he shouldn't have said disgusted. Okay, that's semantics. But you're right. He stuck to the main message, which is I'll never accept that kind of effort in a Game 5. And he kind of stuck with the lack of pushback. And, I think as we've seen these playoffs now play out and what other teams, underdog teams and teams with adversity and injury and how they've pushed back, it really becomes glaring how much that was lacking around here, just as it's become glaring kind of the way the Jets as a team have responded to another season that there's no way this could be chalked up as an overall success. And yet there really is this, we're just happy to be here vibe around so many players. And, I came away from this weekend, Huss, thinking, is there anyone with this organization besides Rick Bowness that was upset at how this played out? And to me, the answer seems to be no.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that there was a lot of disappointment within the player group, and I think that certain guys handle it differently. What was clear is this was discussed quite a bit in the 2 days or the 36 hours, however long it went from, Bones dropping the bomb after Game 5 to those the guys still talking about it, and they, still weren't pleased with it. And what was maybe a little surprising to me was that it was, right through the lineup.
Yeah.
There's some guys, if you told me this was going to happen, there'd be a few guys that, I'd probably say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And listen, I think, Josh Morrissey and Adam Lowry are the two guys that I think we really look at as the leaders, the culture carriers, the guys that will moving forward be the key players. I think Josh was in a tough position being that he didn't play in that game and certainly had a brilliant season. But, I think a lot of it was, especially as they were finishing up, in some ways it was almost sticking up for their teammates a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's something that I guess you want to see. But, I mean, the one thing that I think, maybe a more mature team overall, or maybe leaders would do, from a guy like Blake Wheeler, who's been here for so long, who really started it off with maybe the most damning comment of it all, saying that didn't appreciate the way Rick conducted himself. I was sort of taken aback by that comment. Like I would have, and I think people would have probably handled it a lot better if they say, listen, obviously we didn't like it, and we thought it was maybe a little bit over the top, but at the same time, considering what happened, it is understandable, and we need to own it a little bit because of the way we played in game number 5. And that was the part that I think was missing to everyone. You don't have to like it, and probably no one likes it. Rick talked about it. I mean, no one should like it being aired out like that, but that was the one thing that was really missing from player after player, for the most part, not everybody, but, acknowledging that there was a reason why that happened. But Mike, I guess the thing is, Game 5 is one thing, but what was so interesting and in some ways spectacular about the Bones bomb was the fact that in a mere 56 seconds, the indictment of the team's performance in Game 5 was there for everyone to see, but he was quick to remind everyone that this has not been something new, and he was dealing with that for the better part of 2 months as a skid that almost cost this team a playoff spot in what would have been the biggest debacle for a first-place team into January in NHL history.
Yeah, and that context is so important here, Huss, and these Jets, just because they got into the playoffs and won Game 1, they should not be let off the hook. And that's why it's so important to look at the big picture here, that this was a team that at the midway point of the year looked like a legitimate contender, looked like they had got their act together, were doing the right things, playing the right way. And lo and behold, they get a bunch of injured stars back into the lineup, and all of a sudden, some old habits creep in, and we start to see the same old with this group that we saw under 2 other coaches in recent years. And so that's why the frustration was there. It wasn't just a bad Game 5 performance. It's the fact that this was kind of the cherry on the crap sundae, if you will, of what had been a number of poor performances. And, Huss, I find it really interesting, and I think you've nailed it. Who is the first person to come out and kind of publicly push back against Rick Bowness? It was the former captain, Blake Wheeler. And one of the other interesting revelations to me on Saturday was that there are a lot of players in that room, despite the C being removed from Blake Wheeler's chest, who still very much viewed him as the captain, the leader of this team. And I think what we saw on Saturday was follow the leader. Blake got up there, carved up Rick Bowness, and that it either empowered other players to do the same or had other players saying, I guess we got to follow up. That's a tough act to follow, but if Blake feels like that, we all feel like that. And, it snowballed from there. And to me, it goes back to, the idea that they were creating this culture change by opening up the room to, I guess, other voices by removing the captaincy from Blake Wheeler. I think, though, what we've seen here, Huss, is Blake Wheeler's fingerprints are still all over that room. And I guess until and unless Blake Wheeler isn't in the room, I don't know how that changes. And look, I'm not saying pin this all on Blake Wheeler. I actually thought Blake Wheeler was excellent in the playoffs. He gave it his all. And maybe that's because this is a guy who knows his time is pretty much up around here. He left it all on the table. And I don't think when Rick Bowness was talking about a lack of pushback, he wasn't talking about Blake Wheeler's performance. But the fact is, Blake Wheeler still carries so much weight in that room. He's an imposing figure. And in a lot of ways, the C may have been removed, but clearly the mindset didn't change from this group.
Yeah, and you know what? You make a good point, and Blake talked about it when the final question. He was asked about what, if this is his final game here in Winnipeg, which is an interesting question, but certainly it's a possibility. What will his legacy be? And, he said he left it all out there every day, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But Mike, we've spent a lot of time talking about Scheifele's future and Dubois' future and Connor Hellebuck's future for obvious reasons. Wheeler's in a very different category in that he's towards the end of his career. He's being paid at a rate that, he earned as a back-to-back 91-point player and the captain and a guy that, had a lot on his plate given to him by the organization. But that's pretty much an impossible contract to trade. I mean, from what we've seen last year, unless you want, I'm not even sure if you eat half the money, if that's an easy contract to move, considering, the cap situation around the league. But what do you think? Well, put it this way: when Wheeler walked away from the conversation on Saturday, what was your reaction to him talking about his legacy, and what is the future of Wheeler in particular with this club? Because, as I say, the other players, if they are forced or decide to move them, there will be takers. They'll get assets back. There'll be things happen. The Wheeler situation is way different because I think there is a need for maybe new voices. But at the same time, that is way easier said than done when you got a $8+ million ticket in a hard cap system.
Yeah, I got the sense, Huss, that Blake Wheeler feels like he's probably played his last game with the Jets. And I agree with you. This isn't a contract that's easy to trade. Perhaps if you added a sweetener, a team like Arizona, again, who have taken on so-called, bad contracts for an incentive, and they've usually got the cap space to do that. Maybe that could happen. Reunite Blake Wheeler with Andrew Ladd and Brian Little in the desert for one final year, at least on paper. They wouldn't obviously be playing together. But I do wonder if, one of a couple of things potentially happens. And of course, Kevin Cheveldayoff told us nothing on Sunday about any plans, about anything. And I think that's part of the frustration as well. If there is a vision or a plan, he certainly didn't do anything to share it with the media and by extension the fan base, who the team is now pleading to buy more season tickets without really giving any kind of an indication of what the future short-term or long-term is going to look like. But could they buy Blake Wheeler out? That's for sure a possibility. I don't think the Jets necessarily are going to be up against the cap ceiling next year. So if they're buying Blake Wheeler out, it's probably not because they are so desperate for cap space, but there may be other benefits to it as well. It would open up
Culture change.
Culture change for sure. And I think, again, we saw a lot of that on display this weekend. There's also the possibility, and we don't know what Blake Wheeler went through exactly with his injury. I mean, could there be an LTIR situation in the final year? We know he suffered a gruesome, and I do mean gruesome, groin injury that he obviously came back from and played through. I don't know the intricacies of the CBA and what is involved in an LTIR. How many doctor's notes do you need? One thing I can pretty safely say, Huss, Blake Wheeler's not going to retire. He's not Dustin Byfuglien, I don't imagine, who's going to walk away from $8.25 million. And if he retired, of course, he's walking away from that last year. So I think his contract will play out this year or next season. I just don't think it's going to be in Winnipeg on the active roster. Whether that means a buyout and he becomes a free agent, whether that means a trade to a team that will take on his salary for an incentive, or whether that means an LTIR, I do get the sense that Blake Wheeler's time in Winnipeg is over.
Mike, well, let's talk about those other three key individuals and key assets from an organizational perspective. Mark Scheifele, Connor Hellebuyck, and Pierre-Luc Dubois. What did you get from their availabilities? And was there anything that came out of that maybe changed your opinions on any of their futures based on what we heard on Saturday?
Did you notice when Connor Hellebuyck was asked to kind of reflect on his tenure so far with the Jets? I couldn't help but notice he was talking in the past tense. And I think Elliot Friedman the other day reported that if the Jets were to sign him, like, he's looking to become the highest paid goalie, and why not? Why wouldn't you aim for that? Are the Jets going to take on 8 years at $10+ million with Connor Hellebuyck? I don't know the answer to that, but I certainly got the sense that he's potentially gone this offseason as well.
Before we even get to the offer, I think you know me. I'm a biggest Hellebuyck backer around, and I think that he's the Jets franchise player. You're in the National Hockey League. He has absolutely earned it. And to me, he's a guy you make that sort of investment in. And I've been saying all year, it's going to be a Carey Price-like contract. Now, people can have different opinions on whether that's the prudent move or whether they should do it or not. But my question coming out of that is he even interested in getting that offer here in Winnipeg? And, I've been optimistic about this, thinking that, it's pretty tough to turn down a life-changing offer that sets you up for the rest of your life. And if I'm the agent, my advice is, here's a pen. But I have to admit, my optimism level of whether that was possible was definitely diminished by just the tone of what we heard from Hellebuyck. And he's the one guy that there is never any BS from. He is thoughtful, he's quirky, but he basically tells you what he feels. And I think that was maybe the most interesting part of everything that happened over the entire weekend, to be honest, outside of anything to do with Bones.
Yeah, as soon as he started talking about how he feels his time is running out to win a Stanley Cup, and we know the importance of that, that certainly creates, I think, a sense of urgency to the situation. And I would interpret that almost as perhaps a lack of faith or belief that where he is right now is going to address that concern he has about running out of time. And no doubt, Huss, part of that is probably he looks around the room and he sees what's going on. He also sees potentially both of the team's top centers moving on. And he would be well within his right to wonder, if I stick around, yeah, I can do my best to help this team get to that next level, but my best hasn't been good enough at all when we've had a pretty solid group here. What's this team going to look like in a year or two from now? And if they're moving on from Scheifele and Dubois because they have to, and they're getting, picks and prospects and young players, like that's maybe great for the Jets' future. But is that really great for Connor Hellebuck's immediate goal of trying to win in the here and now? And so, I don't think you could blame Connor Hellebuck for taking a look around the NHL landscape. And there's a number of teams out there, Huss, that will no doubt be looking for a Connor Hellebuck type savior to add to what they already have, believing that he's the final piece to getting to the promised land. With the Jets here in Winnipeg, they've had that piece now, and they haven't even come close. They've won one playoff series in 5 years, and that's with having Hellebuck at times, being superhuman. So if go through the list, the Los Angeles Kings, maybe the Boston Bruins after the disappointment of how their first round exit played out. The Detroit Red Wings, who Steve Yzerman has said, we're going to be really active for a goalie this summer. Hey, Connor Hellebuck's from Michigan. What a coincidence. And they've got lots of great young players. So I just think I would agree with you. Connor Hellebuck sure sounded like he's on his way out. I heard nothing from Pierre-Luc Dubois that made me think otherwise about his future. The only player I'll say this, Huss, that I came away thinking, okay, maybe is Mark Scheifele. And Mark Scheifele said one really interesting thing. I had asked him the question about whether playing with the same organization means anything. And he actually said, yeah, it does. And my favorite player of all time, Steve Yzerman, he did that with obviously the Red Wings. But again, I think if you're Mark Scheifele, and now you're losing Connor Hellebuck. So what's the future look like in the next few years around here if say Hellebuck's gone? And I also asked Mark Scheifele, will you be kind of keeping an eye on what happens with a Connor Hellebuck? Does that factor into your decision? And he very quickly said, oh, absolutely, yes. So, I think when you add it all up, there's the potential for some massive changes this summer that Kevin Cheveldayoff may have no say in the matter because the players are going to call their shots.
Well, and that's why, I kind of chuckle when I hear people, and I get it. We've seen sort of a similar path over the last number of years, and there's a lot of people that, are saying, oh, they're just running it back. They're just going to do this all over again. I
don't think they can.
It's not possible. It absolutely isn't possible. If what we're talking about, that people are thinking that all the guys that we just mentioned are going to come back for one more year and then be gone at the end, like where does that leave the franchise? You want to talk about teams like not really interested in a rebuild. Losing those guys for nothing is a rebuild. I really do believe that this team is good enough and has enough other pieces. And again, Helly's maybe a little different because I think that if you take him out of the picture, huge question is to goaltending. And the one thing the Winnipeg Jets have had when they've been playing good, when they've been playing bad, he's given them a chance to win each and every night.
Yeah.
But, if you trade, the value of guys like Scheifele and Dubois, even with 1 year left, probably not what it would have been a year or two ago, but I think it is still significant. And again, it might be a little bit of a step back from those two players as far as offensive numbers, but this team is going to need to change over the core. And if what you get is some less polished or proven younger players that you've got confidence in that can grow into that next step, given the opportunity, they'll have that opportunity. And I think it'll be less about, picks down the road and maybe some younger players that haven't quite done it at the NHL level and some teams that are willing to move off of guys that, were picked for a reason that have bright futures to get proven established players in now for a chance to win next year and potentially re-sign them for a few more years beyond.
Yeah, and that's where I'll say this about Kevin Cheveldayoff, and I was very critical of his year-ending availability. But one thing Kevin Cheveldayoff, I think, has done a fairly good job of, and you just look at Andrew Kopp, I think, as a great example. turning an expiring asset who they weren't going to be able to keep around long term. I think we would look at what Kevin Cheveldayoff was able to get for Andrew Kopp and say he actually made out pretty well. Morgan Barron is certainly a really nice piece with significant upside. Elias Salmonson looks like a very promising defense prospect, currently playing overseas in Sweden. And Big Bad Brad Lambert is a player that a lot of folks are excited about, who's currently torching the Western Hockey League right now. The Jets turned an expiring Andrew Kopp, and ultimately what ended up just being a pure rental for the New York Rangers, they didn't even sign him long-term, into 3 pretty nice future pieces. I think if you're the Jets, certainly you get more value for those players if you ultimately trade them to the team that they then sign long-term with, because then they're not a 1-year rental if you're moving them this summer. It's a lot more than that. Obviously, the Dubois situation is a little more unique. First of all, he's an RFA, not a UFA this summer, but also because of the Montreal connection and the belief that that's where he ultimately wants to go. But to get back to your original point, Huss, it would be professional malpractice to, in my opinion, to go into next season without extensions on those guys, but to keep them in the fold with the idea that we'll wait till the trade deadline to see what we do with them. There's so much risk with that. There's the risk that they get injured and then you can't move them at all. And then you potentially lose them just for nothing, like the Flames did with Johnny Gaudreau. Like, you can't have that play out. In a draft and develop organization that has trouble attracting free agents, you cannot let your most valuable assets basically expire and get nothing back. And so to me, all the focus is on this summer. Kevin Cheveldayoff has to get an answer, yes or no, from Hellebuyck, Scheifele, Dubois. Do you want to be here long term? And more than that, are you signing here long term? And if those names aren't on contracts at some point this summer on extensions, you have to move them. And you hope that there's enough of a market that you can drive the price up. But at the end of the day, you salvage what you can get, because the alternative is something that I don't think the Jets can afford to even think about.
Well, and let's face it. I mean, coming off of what we heard from Bones, which had been building for a couple months, quite clearly, even if the money works and, even if you're able to get better assets down the road, or you think the value of these guys would be better at the trade deadline, I don't think it's possible to bring all of those same characters back in and just start it off. I mean, I think that in some ways, Bones, almost forced the hand of Kevin Cheveldayoff in some ways. And basically for those 3 players, I mean, as I said, Hellebuck's in a different category. But Dubois, with what we believe, I mean, I guess they'll make a run at trying to sign him. No one expects that to work. Do you think that they'll make a run at trying to extend Mark Scheifele again? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I'm not so sure either, especially given what we saw in terms of Rick Bonus's, he benched Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, obviously, earlier in the season. And clearly some of that anger, now Scheifele didn't play in game 5, so he wasn't. But
he played in the last 2 months of the season. I mean,
he did, and he wasn't very effective in the first 3 games of the series when he was healthy either. So, I think, look, we know if Rick Bonus is being as candid and blunt publicly about his thoughts on some of these players, I can guarantee you, Huss, he's saying a lot more behind closed doors to Kevin Cheveldayoff. And so it comes down to this for me, and I don't know the answer here. Does Rick Bonus have the full confidence of this organization? I would have said yes a few days ago, but then to see how the players push back against the coach and to kind of see the messaging that's out there now that really seems to almost contradict some of what Rick Bonus said. I mean, I don't know. They brought Rick Bonus in with the idea that he would bring this fresh perspective and fresh voice that was so badly needed. And it's almost like a lot of members of the organization are now plugging their ears. They don't want to hear what the independent guy with sort of no strings attached to these players, no loyalties. They don't want to hear what he has to say because it maybe isn't what they were hoping to hear. Well, you know what? If you truly want that accountability, you better start listening. And so I'd like to think that Rick Bowness will have a lot of say in who stays and who goes and which players you can rely on and which ones you can't. But honestly, after all of this chaos over the last few days, I really don't know what to make of how much they really value what Rick Bowness thinks about certain things.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, hey, they didn't have to stick with him. I mean, if it was...
They say he's back, right. Kevin Cheveldayoff says he's coming back.
For sure.
Now,
and
let me put this out there, though. If the Jets run it back, which, as I say, I think would be professional malpractice, if they get no clarity on Dubois, Scheifele, and they just come to camp with those guys now set to be UFAs, I mean, does Rick Bowness even want to coach that same group? He sure sounded like a guy that was at his wit's end. And it makes me think that Rick Bowness has probably said to them, yeah, I'll come back, but this better be a whole different looking group that I have than the one that you left me with at the end of the year.
Well, and listen, this goes back to, I mean, I think many of us, we've talked about this and speaking with people in and around, the Winnipeg Jets that follow them very closely. I mean, even with the Jets sneaking into the playoffs in game number 81, because of what we'd seen and because of the history, I think it was a fait accompli that, there were going to be some significant changes regardless of what happened in the playoffs. And listen, if the team had gone on some crazy run, maybe that changes things. But in a lot of ways, the performance in Game 5 was an exclamation mark and a final reminder of, the fact that this mix just isn't right. Are these guys all very good players? Absolutely. Have they all done good things or great things at times here in Winnipeg? For sure. But, I mean, it is a team game, and there are some things missing from the team. And I think some things that this team needs to do going forward, which gets back to that culture change term that we've been talking about not just this year, but in the past, that in a lot of ways sort of seemed like it had really been fixed for the first half of the season. But I think, as we all know, both from what we saw on the ice and what we heard afterwards, that is not the case.
Let me just say one more thing about Game 5. I'm sure fans are sick of talking or hearing about it and want to put it in the memory banks. But, there's a lot, and Kevin Cheveldayoff was at the top of the list of kind of parading out the injuries as the excuse, right? And I get it. The Jets didn't have Cole Perfetti. They didn't have Josh Morrissey. They didn't have Mark Scheifele in Game 5. That sucks.
They didn't have Pierre-Luc Dubois. They didn't have Kyle Connor. I mean,
but like if the Jets had shown some fight, some effort, and still lost, I think it'd be a much different conversation.
Absolutely.
Right. They didn't show any of that. And for all of those that say, well, Vegas had the advantage, the Jets were banged up, need I remind you that Vegas in Game 5 was without Shea Theodore and Braden McNabb, two of their top four defensemen. The Jets were getting they got Nikolai Ehlers back. And yeah, it's unfair to put it all on Ehlers. He obviously had missed all those games, but that should have lit a spark, right? Yeah, we're banged up, but we're getting one of our best players back. And again, the Jets, they had no room for error. Their season was on the line. Vegas was the team that could afford to maybe take the foot off the gas a bit. They knew they had two other cracks at it if they didn't get it done. And for the Jets to come out against a Vegas team missing two of its top four defensemen with Winnipeg's season on the line, for them to come out and play the first two periods like they did, forget about all your injury excuses. There's no rational explanation for that. And again, I go back to when the Jets were playing their best hockey of the year this year. It's when they were most banged up, but that's when you saw the fight and the effort and the adherence to the systems that just vanished once all these guys went into business for themselves. And that's why, to me, they talked about seismic change last summer with the hiring of Rick Bowness. There's some seismic changes that need to happen this summer when it comes to the personnel.
Well, and you know what? And this is kind of ironic. And you can fill me in. There's a why not question of the day for you, for our friends at Not Autocorp over at Waverly and McGillivray. Let us know in the chat what you think of this. There are a lot of people that, I think the term rebuild is sort of meaning kind of gutting it and being bad for a bit, almost a tanking, and then, getting some great picks and going forward. In an ironic way, the best thing for some of those people might be to actually run it back going forward, because I really do think that if you brought essentially the same group back with Rick Bowness in the aftermath of what's happened this season, of what he had to say, I think it might be so toxic that it would be an absolute disaster. And to your point about this team stepping up and playing the best when they didn't have a number of their top players, there will be guys, they're going to be rolling out 18 skaters every game. There's going to be 2 goalies. I mean, there will be guys in that spot. And I really do think that if you had some new faces, some different types of players that get in, the results, frankly, would be better, and you'll be moving more forward as opposed to waiting for the inevitable end of this group together. So if it does get run back, I don't think there's a chance that it will be. That might, frankly, be the path to being really bad next year, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and I mean, I just don't think the fans, we already can see the fans are getting restless with the product. And, unfortunately, the Jets have not done a very good job a few days now into the offseason of kind of selling hope or change. But there's a lot of offseason left. And, ultimately, talk is cheap, as the saying goes. The proof will be in the pudding, and what ultimately happens over the next few months with regards to potential player movement. But the status quo simply has to go from my perspective. And, the Jets, they do need a significant makeover of the extreme variety.
Hey, speaking of messaging, and you mentioned, we didn't really even play much of Chevy just because it was it was long answers that didn't really tell us very much. And, that's been well documented. We talked about it before. You wrote about it. When do you think the next time we hear from Chevy is going to be? Will it be when something happens? Or will there be maybe after, some meetings and some planning and a little bit more work on some of these things where he does have a little bit more clarity and might actually have a bone for the fans? Might there be a redo? I wouldn't normally expect the general manager to talk again in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But do you think that might happen?
No. I wish it would. I also, Huss, I wish we could hear from ownership. They're obviously sticking with Kevin Cheveldayoff. I find it bizarre that it's up to almost Kevin Cheveldayoff to report the news of his own status. And I think with all the questions about the state of the organization, and with True North trying to get more people to invest in the product, to me, it cries out for someone above Kevin Cheveldayoff to speak to stand in there and take questions about what's happened, where they are right now, where they're going. And again, I won't hold my breath on that. That's just not the way this organization runs. Consider this, Huss. I don't know if people were keeping score at home. Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke a grand total of 4 times this year. The first time was before training camp. The second time was at the midway point of the season. We sat down with him. I think we were in Buffalo, if I recall, or maybe Detroit. Forget which city we were in early January. The third time was the trade deadline. The fourth time was on Sunday. I haven't done the math, but I'm pretty confident in saying there isn't a GM in the league, the other 31 teams, that speaks less and spoke less than Kevin Cheveldayoff. There are GMs that speak like weekly around the NHL with local media. They don't do that here in Winnipeg. He is out of sight, mostly out of mind. And if you go to ownership, it's even a bigger sort of veil of secrecy and silence. So I'd love to subscribe to your school of thought that they'll bring Cheveldayoff out in a few weeks, maybe with an updated plan to say, okay, now I've met with the coaches, I've met with ownership. Here's how we see this. And no, he doesn't have to give us the particulars. I'm going to sign this guy to this much, but something more specific than the 43 minutes of nothingness that we got the other day. The only concrete answer to any question the other day, Huss, was that Rick Bowness would be back. There was no other specific answers to any questions, just a lot of talking in circles. As I wrote in my piece, Kevin Cheveldayoff is the brother of a professional politician, and he took a page right out of the political playbook in how he handled that. I'd like to think we'll get something more specific. I'm not holding my breath.
Well, and Mike, I mean, last week heading in, I mean, knowing this would be happening, I mean, I said on this program, the one thing that we couldn't get is just one big word salad because of, you know, the background, where the situation is in, and more than anything of the challenges that they have as an organization to win back some fans, build some new ones, garner some support. And let's face it, this vision from whether it's Mark Chipman, whether it's Kevin Cheveldayoff, I mean, that is important. That is crucial, and more so than ever before. And as I said, I normally wouldn't even think of this happening, but I mean, maybe taking a mulligan on that in a couple weeks is something that I'm sure nobody wants to do, and they don't want to go through it again. But frankly, it might be necessary. And frankly, I think if they actually did it, might be a good thing, because let's face it, what we saw on the weekend and heard from the weekend has not been received particularly well here. And, you know, were it not for the Leafs winning in those game sevens, probably would have been the number one story in hockey on Monday around the National Hockey League.
Yeah, and for all those, and I've seen a little bit of criticism saying, oh, this is all a media-created narrative. The media are so negative in Winnipeg. All the media does is complain. Look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether I agree with how the Jets have handled things. It doesn't matter if some of my colleagues in print and broadcast. At the end of the day, who cares what we think, right? What the Jets should concern themselves with is what the fans think. And there are some indisputable facts. They had an average of 1,200 empty seats a game last year. There's a lot of season tickets that are up for renewal this year. And I've heard from a lot of people who say they're not renewing, they're frustrated. We're seeing the backlash on social media, which granted is not necessarily reflective of the population as a whole. But I know for a fact that there's a lot of anger out there, and people will ultimately speak with their wallets and with their support. And, you know, so that may force the hand. I agree with you, Huss. If the team realizes that, geez, we've got a bit of an inferno going on here, we need to bring out the extinguishers and try and get this blaze out of control. Perhaps there would be something like that, because as you say, we did get a word salad the other day, and it wasn't even a good salad. There was no croutons. There was no crumbled egg or feta cheese. This was just pure lettuce without any dressing, the worst kind of salad to choke down.
Bunch of consonants and vowels mixed up into it. Well, as I said, I mean, I have a feeling that we'll be catching up and following this throughout. Well, we certainly will be. You'll be covering it in the Winnipeg Free Press. We'll be talking about it here. But it does, I mean, I think we all agree this has been an extraordinary 5 days around the team, coming out of Game 5 and the disappointment of, you know, the way the team bowed out. It's very clear, even if you don't subscribe to what, you know, the whatever the vision is, which hopefully we'll find out at some point. I mean, things are going to, it will be interesting because things are, as we've said, believe have to happen.
Yeah.
But man, it just everything that happened with Bones and the players' pushback on that adds a whole nother level to the upcoming season. And I think almost accelerates the need for maybe even bigger changes that they even had an appetite for even after Game 5 before Bones hit the mic.
Yeah, a lot of salad and some popcorn as well that you might want to have at the ready, because the Jets have become kind of must-see, but for all the wrong reasons as of late. So there's, as I said, there's a lot of time to turn this around, but certainly the direction they appear to be heading right now is not a very good one. We'll see what the coming weeks and months bring. But one thing that's likely indisputable is there'll be no shortage of juicy nuggets for us to chew on here in what promises to be just a fascinating stretch for the Jets.
No doubt about it. Mike, thanks so much for doing this. I guess we should just quickly on the way out. I mean, there was a little bit of news that is of interest, speaking of the future and going forward. The second rounder from a year ago, Nikita Chibrikov, signed. He's on a PTO. I imagine he'll just hang out with the Moose and probably get a little bit of a taste of the atmosphere and meet some guys that he might be playing with next year. But he's an interesting prospect. I mean, you look at the KHL numbers, not big, played in a couple of other leagues and did better. But what do you know about Chibrikov, and just thoughts on that signing?
Yeah, I actually saw him up close the other day after the Shovel Day Off news conference. I stuck around and watched game 2 of the Moose playoffs, and Chibrikov was actually up in the press box. He's not a very big man at all. I think he's listed at 5'9" or 5'10". But he certainly has a lot of skill. And if you look around, there's actually been some comparisons. And to be clear, I'm not saying he's going to turn out to be these players or even close to. But there's been some Kucherov and Kaprizov type comparisons to, a bit of an undersized guy, but oodles of talent and skill. The question, as always, though, is, how can he adapt to the North American game? But he's an enticing, intriguing prospect for sure, and it's a good get for the Jets, Huss. He's a guy, when he was drafted, there was a feeling like he would have gone a lot higher if there was certainty that he was going to come to North America. So for the Jets now, 2 years after they drafted him, his KHL deal has expired. He obviously didn't renew it. And so he's here in Winnipeg, and that's great news for the Jets. Because, you can never have enough kind of lottery tickets, if you will. And he's a pretty intriguing lottery ticket. I don't know that we'll see him play. I mean, the Moose are 1-1 in their best of 5. Maybe if the Moose could go on a bit of a run here, maybe he gets in at some point. But like you say, it's more to get acclimatized with the lifestyle and the organization. And certainly come the fall, I'd expect he starts with the Manitoba Moose next year, but he'll be a very interesting guy to keep an eye on. And so you're right, a little nugget of good news. And hey, there's another one as well. Dominic the goalie, I call him that because I can still barely pronounce his last name. You want to try it?
DiVincentis.
Very good. He was just named the Ontario Hockey League Goaltender of the Year. He's a guy, Huss. I actually met him last summer when the Jets drafted him. He was in Montreal. I'll say this. He is going to become, if and when he becomes a Winnipeg Jet, he will be an absolute fan favorite. There are some Eric Comrie-like powers of positivity to this guy. He's a dynamic personality, and from what we're seeing, at least against his peers, he's a hell of a goaltender and a really intriguing prospect. We talk about, succession to Connor Hellebuyck.
Yeah.
And he's still likely a few years away given his age and lack of experience. But the Jets may have a real good one in him to potentially, be the eventual heir apparent to Connor Hellebuyck.
Well, let's get Dom and McGroarty in here ASAP just for the vibe check around the club. Mike, thanks for doing this. Always a great chat. You be well. We'll look forward to further coverage in the Winnipeg Free Press from you and the boys.
Keep that extinguisher handy. You might need it.
There's Mike McIntyre of the Winnipeg Free Press. Folks, we mentioned the Gold Eye season's coming up. ASD is back, Assiniboia Downs, May 22nd. Circle it on the calendar and get ready for live racing action. Cannot wait to renew the rivalry of myself and Remis picking head-to-head. we've got one win apiece in our first 2 years of making our picks for the ponies, and this will be the rubber match this year. Of course, you can go to asdowns.com for more information on the upcoming live racing season, and the Triple Crown gets going on the weekend, and we will get a little taste of what's to come at the track by teeing it up with Kirk Contois coming up on Friday. Great to have Assiniboia Downs back on board with us. And I was also mentioning about how excited I am about the fish games, also to hit Craft Beer Corner. And of course, Craft Beer Corner is not complete without our favorite little brown jug. Now, last year at the games had quite a few 1919s, had some Hefeweizens, but I would be shocked if we are not able to get our hands on the new generic lager from our friends at Little Brown Jug. It's your basic lager, just better, impressively standard in the best way, light and clean to taste with a mellow flavor and crisp finish. Now Manitoba can support local without having to move away from the domestic taste they've come to expect with the light beer. Available now in 8-packs or by the can through our tap room. And as I mentioned, I was at the Osborne Tap House on Friday night checking out some music, and it was on tap there. So, if you're out on the town, see if the new Little Brown Jug offering generic is available there as well. All my buddies are fired up. Opening day for Men's Day at Breezy Bend. Course opened on the weekend. Golf season is here, folks. And Breezy Bend is one of Manitoba's top private clubs with a championship course, top-notch practice facilities, and the best 19th hole around on their beautiful course-side patio. Great men's, ladies, and junior programs. Breezy's the perfect long-term golfing home for you and your family. If you're thinking about becoming a member, find out more at breezybend.ca or give our pal Corey Johnson a little dingle for more information on how you and your fam can become members over at Breezy Bend. And a big shout out to our friends at Aikens Lake as well, as they prepare for another great summer of fishing in Manitoba Paradise. Aikens Lake, world-class fly-in fishing lodge where you can be on the water in less than 2 hours from the city of Winnipeg. It's always my favorite 3 or 4 days of the year. They're at about 90% capacity right now for the year. So if you are looking at a corporate getaway for customers, team building event, or just a friends and family trip, get on it now, aikenslake.com. And any university students looking for a great job in Paradise for the summer, send a resume to Pitt at Aikens Lake, as the Aikens gang is looking for a few more servers and guides to be part of the Aikens team for 2023. All right, let's get Remo back in here. Remis, we mentioned, and I know David Asplin, I think, was asking about it in chat. CFL draft goes tonight. And, it's funny. The CFL draft is maybe, obviously with the timing of everything going on with the Jets, has been a little bit on the back burner. But it seems to be even more on the back burner with the Bombers being the powerhouse they've been for the last number of seasons. Before, it was so important because of all the needs of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But, man, when you look at this roster going into the season, I think we'll once again see the Bombers be able to look around at what's available when they pick at 8th overall and pick one of the best athletes, all-around football players. They think they can make it. There's a couple mocks up at CFL.ca. Bombers picking in at 8, and then also at 15th overall, 6th in the second round. And we'll kind of get through the draft tomorrow and touch on that tomorrow on Winnipeg Sports Talk.
Yeah, Ted Wyman from the Winnipeg Sun said he's going to hop on with us, so he'll give us some insight on the picks.
Well, we can also talk to Ted. I'm looking forward to Ted's thoughts on the aftermath of the weekend, too. He was, of course, there both days. I mean, it was all hands on deck from pretty much everyone in the Winnipeg media for that. And Teddy Drip will have some takes on that as well. But he'll be a go-to guy for tons of Bomber info at the Winnipeg Sun and here on WST. So be fun to kind of find out a little bit more about what the Bombers do tonight, tomorrow when Ted joins us.
Yeah, they also had the global draft today where they took 2 punters. Jamison Sheehan, 8th overall, went to Cal from, sounds like he's an Aussie. And they took Carl Schmitz, a 36-year-old punter from Bermuda, 17th overall.
A 36-year-old Bermudian punter? That is, bring on more CFL global draft. That is phenomenal. I'd totally be here for an Aussie punter. Schickster, I'm sure, is giving me a hard time for not talking enough Aussie rules football. I know he's a big AFL guy. I don't mind laying a nickel on it every now and then. But those dudes are athletes and certainly can kick. So a punter, my dream is an Aussie punter that can actually blow guys up too, tackling. So maybe they got that with their selection out of Cal.
Yeah, and this Carl Schmitz from Bermuda, he's gotten some NFL looks. Ted says he got a look from the Broncos, but that was back when he was 28. 8 years ago, if my math is correct, has a big leg. So I think we might see some, or sounds like we're going to see some competition for the kicking, either punting and place kicking in training camp. As seems like every other, position on the roster you seem to be comfortable with, but the kicking is a constant thing here. I think during the off season, it's been every day, not every day, but did they get a kicker yet? Did they get a kicker yet? We heard that quite a bit.
Bring on the competition. And the minute we started talking about punters, Doug Phil's in there. How about a place kicker?
Yeah, there it is.
One at this rate, bring Westy out of retirement. Yeah, poor Legio's I'm sure he'll have an opportunity to compete for the job, but there is a lot of competition coming up, certainly in that positional battle. Not so sure about many other spots on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers roster. But Bomber fans, join us tomorrow. Ted will pop on the program and we'll get a little recap of what the Bombers do tonight, as well as what's happening around the rest of the National Hockey League. Well, Remo, we've got hockey games tonight. This is a perfect little segue into checking out the lines for the Coolbet lines today on Winnipeg Sports Talk for round number 2. But before we get to the lines for tonight, take a quick look at the series lines. And no surprise, the Maple Leafs are a favorite against the Florida Panthers. The Leafs minus 182, Panthers plus 153. Listen, we all know that the Leafs are a very public team. Their fan base is all fired up and really excited, as they should be, for the first time since 2004 to get to the second round of the playoffs. But this is, to me, this number is way too big. Florida, after beating Boston, winning the President's Trophy last year, has a lot going for them right now. I think that they are very live to win this series. And I'm going to pick them at plus 139 to continue their mojo from that win and jump on the Leafs in game number 1.
I put out a poll, Huss, to all of our viewers right now. Shout out to the 400 plus in chat, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and thumbs up if you haven't. But 56% of the people who responded, 82 votes so far, think the Panthers are going to win. I don't know if that's Leafs hate.
Well, I said it. I picked them today on the Lock Shop, and I said this is not a Leaf hater pick. I actually really like a lot of players on the Leafs. Some of their fan base I can do without. But I listen, this just feels like a run coming for the Panthers after. And Paul Maurice has done this before. He's almost due for, maybe a run to the Cup final or something like that. And dodging the bullet that they did at the end of Game 5, surviving, winning Game 6, and winning Game 7 in OT. And I wouldn't be surprised if there might be a little bit of a natural letdown for Toronto after the big win against Tampa and not playing the Boston Bruins that everyone expected would be there in that next round. So that series gets going tonight. As I mentioned, 139 plus 139 for the Panthers to win game 2. And the biggest favorite in the second round, not surprising, the Dallas Stars, minus 204, Kraken plus 168. I was dead wrong, like most people were, on the Colorado Kraken series. So take that for what it's worth. But I do like Dallas, and I actually like Dallas in 6 or less at plus money at plus 105.
If I could revise my picks right now, I think I would take Dallas to the Cup and maybe even win the Cup. Us, their road got a bit easier having to play Seattle and not Colorado. They have the best goalie left in the playoffs. Sounds like Joe Pavelski is slowly making his way back. Their defense very strong. They got their elite D in Heiskanen, elite center Rupe Hintz, Robertson, elite scorer. I mean, they got a lot of talent. Jamie Ben's on their third line. They have this rookie. No one talks about him. Wyatt Johnston. Man, he's been solid, and Dadonov was a sneaky good acquisition. I really like
Domi
Dallas.
too.
They're
Domi's
deep.
been impactful in the playoffs so far.
Domi, what? I think Dallas. I think I have Edmonton winning, but I don't know. Dallas I think Dallas is very strong. So this could be quick. Although we thought it was going to be quick for Colorado, didn't work out. But I think Colorado. I think the loss of all their depth caught up to them. There's a lot of those reports about Nichushkin need to go away from the team. Didn't help them. So,
what a disaster that was in the middle of the playoff series.
Yeah, that's
Canes and Devils. As I said, I was stunned that the Devils are the favorite, and maybe there's a lot of people like myself that are finally waking up, going, "Oh my God, this team is really good." I still thought that the Rangers, backed by Shesterkin, would make it through that first round. It didn't happen. They dropped the first 2 and won 4 of the next 5 and are off to the round. The Devils are minus 127 favorites against the Carolina Hurricanes at plus 107. And then the Edmonton Oilers and the Vegas Golden Knights. Edmonton minus 161, Vegas plus 136. Interesting to see 2 teams with home ice advantage be underdogs in the series.
Well, we've seen it through the playoffs. Like, the home ice doesn't matter. The road team, like Boston, the President's Trophy winners, lost every game. They lost 3 games at home.
Road teams were like 14. I think the road teams won 14 more games, and I guess that might have been less with Jersey winning the home game last night. But heavily tilted towards teams winning on the road.
So I don't think it really matters. I'm curious how Edmonton is going to get to the inside and get quality shots on Brossoit, because the Jets certainly weren't able to for most of the series, and we know they have really quality players there, and how will their depth match up with Vegas's depth? And I don't know if they really needed it there in the first series. Actually, that's not true. They got some big contributors. What, Klim Kostin was pretty good. Bukestad had some points. Klim Shady.
And it's funny. Obviously, I do a lot of work with Dustin Nielsen in Edmonton, who focuses on the Oilers on the smash hit Nielsen show. Shout out to the AM Nasty. He was always the big Puljujärvi guy, who was in some ways sort of the whipping boy of the Edmonton media. Once Yessi got shipped out, Kyler Yamamoto sort of became the next target, and there was Yamo scoring the winner in the final game against the Los Angeles Kings. So things are going well for Edmonton right now, and I lean Edmonton. Listen, I got a lot of respect for Vegas. I think this is a real good team, deep team, but it's very, very difficult to bet against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl the way they're playing right now. All the odds are up right now at the NHL playoffs. And we do have a special Lock Shop Series partner parlay. Here it is. We've got Edmonton to win the series. We've got Dallas to win their series against Seattle. And we've got Florida plus a game and a half. So essentially what that means is Florida can win their series or lose in 7. We put that together. It was plus 310. The guys have kindly given us plus 365 on this one. So you got to get in on that before the puck drops in the game tonight with the Leafs and the Panthers. Plus 365. Great number on that. If you want to ride, it's there in the exclusives under the Lock Shop Partner Parlay at coolbet.com.
Well, you're saying Florida? You think Florida's going to keep it that close, hey?
I think Florida's winning the series.
Wow. Is that you being a Leafs hater, or is that...
No, I said this is not a Leafs hater. I picked them to beat Tampa. I just think that right now there is something going on. First of all, I think Matthew Tkachuk's been the most dominant player in the playoffs so far, and what he's doing right now truly is incredible. But, man, the boost that they are going to go into Toronto with, having beaten Boston... Maurice is firing these guys up, and they're feeling it right now. I just think that this is a real, real tough out. And as great as it was that the Leafs finally got over that hump, I do think there might be a bit of a letdown in the fact that they're not playing the Boston Bruins. I don't think they're going to take Florida for granted. But I'm just telling you right now, I think Florida is a very live underdog. I think they win the game tonight to get the game that they need to win away from home. And I kind of think that Florida... Did you do a poll for the Florida Leafs series? What did everyone say about that?
Yeah, everyone was taking Florida. No one here...
The Panthers.
People wrote in chat. We asked, are you taking Florida because you hate the Leafs? And everyone wrote yes. Although maybe people are cheering for Paul Maurice here now too. I think people do want to see him have success, even if he did. I think people are having more sympathy for him for stepping down based on what we saw from last Thursday after Game 5.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is fascinating. Both Maurice and Dave Lowry pulling off huge upsets in game number 7 and moving on to the second round of the playoffs. Well, we'll see what happens tonight. I am on a Florida-Dallas parlay for tonight. Moneyline wins, whether they win in OT or regulation, it doesn't matter. Plus 275 if you want to get that in over on Coolbet. So 2 games tonight. We got game 1 between the Lakers and Warriors for folks that like the hoops as well. And the CFL draft this evening, Reem. So still lots for us to kick around in addition to the ongoing drama around the Winnipeg Jets offseason as we hit with Mike, and Murat, I believe, will join us tomorrow for his thoughts on all of it.
Yeah, Murat's joining. And I was looking at our, comparing, we had such a strong March and April after, January, February gets kind of slow around here the last 2 years, which I've realized. And looking at our shows this time last year, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the day Barry Trotz was fired by the Islanders.
Oh, huge day for WST.
Which I think we had like 800. It was like we didn't have to do anything. And people started. And that was when Trotz Watch began. And it was an amazing summer for us. I don't know if we're going to be replicating that, but it's like I'm getting just that same kind of feeling that any rumors can have. We haven't even played, there's a couple things we haven't mentioned today, but we didn't even play Aaron Portzline on with Tony Marinaro talking about PLD's love for.
I listened to that. Yeah.
We'll get to that. One thing before we go, we didn't even mention. Cap Friendly tweeted this out that that Axel Jonsson Fjallby is going to become a free agent, unrestricted this summer, because the Jets played him. They fell 1 game short in order for him to retain his RFA status. So. That was one other Jets note we haven't mentioned today.
Yeah, listen, I'm an Axel fan. I would have liked him to be in the lineup a little bit more, and I think if you look at actual production from the fourth line, he was pretty good compared to the rest of his counterparts. I'll say this, and I mean, I know there's probably some people going, it's insane that they didn't give him the game. I have no idea. I'm just finding out this now, like most other people. But let's not forget that he was picked up off waivers at the beginning of the season. I mean, this is a borderline NHL player, and I think if the Winnipeg Jets think that he's got a future with them, they'll probably have a chance to get him signed if there is an opportunity going forward. But I guess it'd probably be easier to not have to worry about him going elsewhere as I said, I'm not even sure how much in the plans he is, Reem, because we've talked about, a change, not like the big change of Axel, who wasn't even in the lineup for a considerable period of time at the end of the year, is going to be a big difference. But I was a fan of his. I thought he killed penalties well. I thought he could skate like the wind. And, put it this way, if he is on the club or is playing a fourth line role, I don't think that's too bad of a situation. But let's face it, the big questions right now are not about the Axel Jonsson Fjallbys of the Jets roster. It's about PLD. It's about 55. It's about Connor Hellebuck. And, of course, Blake Wheeler, as we talked about with Mike.
Yeah. This is a fourth-line player who they sent down on to the Moose, and he didn't get claimed by anyone. So I don't think, he would be a huge loss. It does scream a bit of maybe asset mismanagement, but I don't know how much they really cared because they never played him. And I actually don't know why he wasn't in the lineup all the time. They said about handedness, but whenever he was in, he would score goals. And you look at his per 60-minute rate stats in terms of point scoring. I mean, he was ahead of Carson Kuhlman, who kept getting into the lineup. So,
listen, we can talk about Axel. We can talk about Kuhlman. If we're talking about asset management, the one that got away was Mikey Eyssimont. And there he was playing in the playoffs with Tampa. And I mean, the one thing that for a good period of time, it seemed like this team was missing was that passion, was that energy. And that's why so many people loved him when he showed up here in Winnipeg and started playing. And credit to him for turning that opportunity in San Jose into being an asset that Tampa wanted to acquire, ironically trading Vlad Nemestikov to San Jose, who then ended up coming to the Winnipeg Jets in a deadline deal for a 4th-round pick. But those are the sort of players I think, when we talk about, the concept of building this team and what the Winnipeg Jets need a little bit more. Certainly there's a lot of talent in it, but it's that bite. It's a little bit more of a playoff style hockey, certainly some physicality, some ruggedness amongst the forwards, I think would be, and again, Essimant's a small guy. So, this is not a guy that's going to go around and be this physical force, but doesn't shy away from contact at all and was a bit of a buzzsaw when we saw him here. And it was interesting to see how quickly fans warmed up to him. But it was even more interesting to see the impact that he made with a team with a championship pedigree like the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, he went to San Jose and was immediately on their top line and top power play, and then got acquired by the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, good for him. Nice jump from the Moose to the Jets to the, 2-time Stanley Cup champions. And now they're out of the playoffs. So it was definitely an interesting year, Huss, in terms of Jets asset management as we look back on the season. I know we got to wrap up here. I'm enjoying seeing all the comments in the chat as well. So this has been fun.
Yeah, keep them coming. And if you're listening after the fact, leave us a comment on today's episode with your thoughts in the comments of the YouTube chat. Thanks again to Dave Poulin. If you joined us late, make sure to get back. Dave had some really interesting conversation with me about his reaction to everything coming out of Winnipeg over the last few days. And of course, Mike McIntyre, great visit from Mike as well. That is going to do it. Enjoy Game 1 tonight between the Leafs and Panthers and the Stars and Kraken. And we'll hit up tomorrow with the latest from the Stanley Cup playoffs, thoughts on the Jets offseason with Murat Atesh and Ted Wyman with the latest from Bomberville and tonight's CFL draft. Thanks to the sponsors that make the show happen, and most of all, thanks to you for making Winnipeg Sports Talk a part of your day. Have a great one. We'll catch you tomorrow right here, 1 p.m. live on YouTube on WST.
Oh, my God! Oh! Shut it down! Let's go home!
Thanks for tuning in to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast feed at winnipegsportstalk.com.